Hey everyone, happy Monday. You're watching TechStrong TV. I'm Alan Schimmel, and today is September 28th. This is episode 95 of TechStrong TV. We're planning some special stuff for the 100th episode. I guess it'll be sometime next week. So stay tuned for that. But thanks for joining us today. We have some good stuff in store for you. I'm going to tell you all about it in just a moment. I also want to mention that this week we have a large virtual event that we here at MediaOps have produced. It's actually our second year producing this one. It's operationalizing operationalizing cloud native with Kubernetes. It's our second annual sort of Kubernetes themed event. And we have some great speakers, including Priyanka, the executive director for CNCF. We have Tim Hocken from Google, one of the original Kubernetes engineers on the engineering team. Who else? Liz Rice. We have a great panel of some CNCF board members, including Michelle Nurali, Apara Sinha, and Matt Klein. It's a really great show. So check that out. I think it's a Kube Virtual Summit or Kubernetes Virtual Summit.com. You can get to it off of the Container Journal site as well as DevOps.com. It's free. Register. We'll see you there. It's October 1st. For today, though, I have a couple of new companies to introduce to you. One is a company called Blue Bracket, Silicon Valley based. We speak with their CEO, Prakash Linga. They have a little bit of a different take on DevSecOps. They are working on code security, though, and I'm going to let Prakash tell you more about it. But it's yet another flavor, if you will, for DevSecOps. I'm happy to have them on here and tell you about them. Then we're going to go back to a company based out of Israel that we've met with before, our friends at Sea Lights, and they're rolling out something on governance, on cloud, on code security governance, and I think it's again more DevSecOps related, but I think it also signals a maturity a little bit in how we're approaching code security. Then staying on a security theme today, I guess. I'm really happy we have our second episode that we've produced with Gary Berman on the Cyber Hero Adventure show. Gary has a really good one lined up today. I'm looking forward to it. Check that out. After Gary's show, I will be back with Tim Hocken. We're going to replay Tim's keynote from the 2019 Kubernetes event as a way of getting you ready for the 2020 Kubernetes event, which Tim again will be keynoting. So we have Tim from back in 2019. At that point, we're going to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, who will do the news. Also, Charlene has an interview with John Corwell of Domain Tools and his participation in the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition. Charlene will also have a webinar preview of some of the great webinars we have lined up for you this week here at MediaOps. Then I'll be back. We'll bring over Mitch at the Analyst Corner. Mitchell has some great commentary and video. And then we'll be over with Mike Vizard. Mike's Channel Roundup has a good show this week, and I think you'll enjoy that. And then I'll wrap things up. So probably a little over 2 hours worth of some great TechStrong TV today. We're going to take a break right now for a commercial, and we'll be back with our first guest. As I said earlier, I want to introduce you to the company Blue Bracket and their CEO, Prakash Linga. They have yet another kind of fresh look at DevSecOps and another aspect of what we can do to make our code more secure. And that is making sure that whatever secrets or IP are contained in our code pre-deployment are protected as well. So whether you're using Git or some third party has access to the code, how do we secure that IP? Here's my conversation with Prakash Linga, CEO of Blue Bracket.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel. You're watching another segment here on TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment is Prakash Linga. He's the CEO of Blue Bracket. Prakash, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So Prakash, I don't think we've featured Blue Bracket on TechStrong before. So why don't we start there? Why don't you give our audience maybe a little bit of background on Blue Bracket? You're the CEO, on yourself, and we'll go from there.
Sounds great. So as we all know, right? So the world runs on code today. Right? Code is not just used to build applications, but it's also used to put together machine learning models. It's used to drive infrastructure as code. The purpose of code has completely changed. And yet, the way we secure code hasn't changed much at all. Right? Companies are still doing what they did before, where security teams find a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, throw it over the wall to developers, and that developers may or may not fix for a long time. Right? And so there's this need to move security to the left and give developers the tools to enable them to do their work with the tools of their choice, like Git, like the CI/CD integration. Okay? But at the same time, Git also poses a problem from a security perspective. Right? First of all, right, security teams need visibility into code, into developer actions, something that Git doesn't provide, given it's built for open source. Right? And hackers have been targeting code repos like GitHub and GitLab, right? Primarily because there's a lot of valuable information in code. Right? And not just intellectual property, but secrets in code, PII or PHI information, and a wealth of information on infrastructure, really the blueprint for infrastructure that may contain other vulnerabilities. Right? And so, in a nutshell, right, Blue Bracket is the only company that offers a comprehensive code security solution which protects code and prevents threats from code. Right? And Blue Bracket not only protects, it secures the most valuable enterprise asset code, right? But it also protects from code being used as an attack vector into the enterprise. Right? The world runs on code today, and Blue Bracket makes it safe. Right? As I mentioned, safe with Git and with open source, but also safe from secrets in code or other vulnerabilities, and safe from theft or accidental leak of code into the public universe.
So, a couple questions there. When we talk about securing code, then you're talking about securing code that has not yet, let's say, been compiled or deployed, right, as an application. We're talking about when code is still in the repository and development stages, right?
Yes.
So I would imagine, and I know we had some questions we want to hit, but I had, listening to you, I had other questions that pop up. So I would imagine that, you know, one of the issues is at the same time you want to secure that code, being in a collaborative environment, we need to give access to that code to other folks on the team as well. So, and sometimes those two aims bang heads against each other, where I need to secure the code, but yet I need to share that code with others who are working on it. And how does Blue Bracket play into that piece of who has access to code, recognizing that there are legitimate times where people need access to the code?
Totally, right? And so that's where, if you look at the world of code, right, it's changed quite a bit, right? Going from the monolithic systems like SV and CVS to completely decentralized, system based on Git, right? And and in particular, right? So the code was all sitting on a repository on a server. There isn't really a challenge here. right? It's when that code gets out of the repo onto the developer machines, especially in this world where developers are working remotely and there are a lot of contractors involved that companies work with. Right? So it's especially important to know who has access to your code and what they're doing with that code. Right? Where is it traveling? Right? And with something like infrastructure as code, it's not just who has access, it's also important to know who's executing that code. Right? And that's really the problem we help solve. Right? We help provide right, security teams that visibility into where their code is and who is accessing that code. Right? But at the same time, right, we also alert them if that code makes it to a public repo, either inadvertently when developer is trying to work on an open source project, or they make a private repo public accidentally, or put in a sample code that may contain sensitive information. Right? So all of these are different scenarios why code is everywhere today. And a solution like Blue Bracket would help highlight and give visibility into where the code is, help understand what subset of that code is important, right? Is intellectual property, is infrastructure as code, and then reason about who has access, who should have access, right? And in particular, we do provide alerts around if there are too many owners, there are external users who are accessing that repo but have been inactive for a long time, things of that kind, right? And take it to the next level and think about how do we do restrict access to just the right, managed machines and things of that kind as well.
Excellent, excellent. So, I mean, one way of looking at it is that all of this is, when I was in security, and I was in security 20 years, attack surfaces is the term we use to talk about some of these things, right? And we want to keep our attack surfaces as small as possible. But really, from what you're describing here, right, it's been about an actual expanding the attack surface, right? We made the attack surface bigger by having it not just in the Gits, but in all of these third-party machines and everything else. And so a larger attack surface is harder to defend. But how are hackers getting into this larger, how do they exploit this new attack surface then?
That's a great question, right? So from a hacker's standpoint, right, so what they're looking for an easy path into the enterprise. Right? They may also be looking for, intellectual property that may sometimes reside in code, right? So what's happening today is, given the world of code is a wild, wild west with, as we spoke about, code is everywhere. It is very routinely, right, some of the sensitive information leaks out to public repositories. Right, and this information could be secrets in code, it could be PII or PHI information, it could be some infrastructure blueprint, right, some internal URLs or network configuration or any such information, right? And many a times, if you have access to application or service code, you could have a better sense for what are those open source vulnerabilities or other vulnerabilities that are still live with an exploit that they could use, right? How are hackers finding this information? It's very simple, right? They could just go to GitHub and do a GitHub search, right, on a few keywords, and are able to very easily find public repos that contain all of this valuable information, which makes their job that much easier to find a path into the enterprise.
Excellent. So I think we've done a good job of identifying the issue. Let's talk a little bit about how Blue Bracket helps with the problem. What is it exactly you guys do?
Yeah. So Blue Bracket is something that we built to make sure that we work alongside developers to enable developers to really use Blue Bracket in the context of their CI/CD pipeline, but also on the developer machine to identify and fix some of these issues early in the pipeline, right? Whether it's secrets in code, whether it's PI information or files or other information that should not be in code in the first place.
So it does it by scanning? Are you sort of scanning the code for this kind of thing, or?
That's correct. Yeah. So we are what we do really well is scanning the code and helping identify secrets without too many false positives, right, with a high true positive rate, right? And do that in the context of the developer working right on a daily basis, that help them find and fix these early. Okay? We also help developers highlight code copies, right? And security teams highlight code copies, right? We fingerprint code, and whenever a developer is potentially moving code right from a sensitive enterprise repo or a private repo into a public repo, we can alert them, and we can help them understand what code is it that they are trying to move, and make sure that that's really what they're wanting to do. Right? So you can see why these are the same tools that security teams would use to find code in the public domain, right? And that's how we are helping shift that problem left and helping address the problem early and address it with developers in mind, alongside how they work, the tools that they use.
Excellent. So you mentioned shift left, and of course shift left brings up the whole issue of DevSecOps, right? And that's an area we've covered now for. I'm doing the DevSecOps event at RSA for 5 or 6 years already, so we've been covering DevSecOps for many years. And it hasn't always been easy, Prakash, right? But there was a time where people didn't think that DevSecOps was real, right? And that there was such why, what are you talking about? And the whole concept of shifting security left further into the development, earlier into the development life cycle. Let's say that, right?
Yeah.
Was kind of, people didn't all buy into it. Now, of course, I think they do more, because I think they've realized, A, that it works, and B, that it's really important. But a lot of times when we look at DevSecOps, what we see is, we're testing code. We're running vulnerability scans earlier or stuff like that. I don't know if we've run into a company that is actually looking at code for things like secrets or other kind of IP that may be exposed in that code pre-deployment.
Yeah, so we're definitely very unique that way, right? And so this is where DevSecOps is extremely important, because in the past, right, I've been in engineering orgs for many years now, and we have tried to do this, right, where security teams try to find different vulnerabilities, including, right, secrets in code and others, right? And then they file a whole bunch of tickets that developers, right, look at it as strictly overhead with little context and don't really get to, right? But at the same time, right, so being a developer, right, so if security is something that's enabling me to, right, continue that innovation, right, and security at the speed of dev, right, would be extremely helpful, right, in this context, where as the time when I commit something to the local Git repo, right, before even committing, pre-commit, if I'm aware, right, that's the best time I would want to mitigate some of these issues, right? And so it's even better to do it on the development machine than in the CI/CD pipeline. But integrating this into the CI/CD pipeline gives the security teams, right, and the operation teams additional visibility and another layer of trying to find and fix things right earlier in the pipeline, right? So that automation, that developer-friendly, developer-positive automation, is really what makes it successful. Right? And that's what we are seeing with our customers, right, who have tried to use open source tools to solve some of these problems or try to put together their own tools. They very quickly realize that it's a very manual effort led by security without developers being involved, and hasn't gotten too far. And the excitement with us is to put the two together, right, and have a symbiotic relationship.
So my experience has been that the more successful DevSecOps solutions are recognizing that while it's very much a security solution, that the security team maybe approves, or even it's out of their budget even, the best DevSecOps tools are geared towards developers using them, right? And as you mentioned, developers didn't always let's use the word appreciate. Developers didn't appreciate security tools that were written for the security guys, right? And to them, as you said, it was kind of overhead and noise, and it didn't. So, but when you use tools, or when you give them tools that were developed for them, for their purposes, I think they appreciate and use it much more than that old style security tool that was made for the security pro.
Precisely, right? So take me as an example, right? So I've written code for a long time, and I create an SSH key on day one to access my code repositories. But I haven't rotated those keys ever. Not because I don't think security is important, right? But at the same time, I'm focused on speed of innovation, right? But if there's a way for me to have that happen behind the scenes automatically, I'd love that. Right? I'd love to be
right. No one ever says, "Oh, I want buggy code," or "I want insecure code." No one ever says that, or "I want to have secrets in my code." It's a question of priorities. Prakash, speaking of that, we're almost out of time, but we didn't even mention if for people to get more information, where do they go?
They go to bluebracket.com, right, to learn more about the solution we offer, right? And there's a wealth of information around the product, the offering. We'd love to have a conversation, showcase the demo, and right, to tell you more about our company, product, and how we how we can help solve this problem of code moving to the public world.
How do you? I just want to make sure for people who are listening, is it BLUE or BLUBRA?
It's BLUBRACKET. It's blue without the E.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. I don't want people to type in the wrong thing, because that's a whole nother security issue, right? Sound alike domains. Who knows where that goes? Well, listen, thanks for joining us and giving us, this is yet another facet in the DevSecOps arsenal as developers become more security savvy. So good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me, and it was wonderful to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Prakash Linga, CEO of Blue Bracket, helping developers to reduce their attack surfaces and make our code safer. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest. You know, I've been covering sea lights now probably for almost 2 years, well, certainly more than a year. I used to meet them at a lot of shows, sometimes in Israel or Europe. Obviously, with COVID, we don't meet at shows, but we're still staying abreast of what they've been doing. They're rolling out, it's almost like a new category, called security governance. I had a chance to sit down with Chris Rosewell and Aaron Scher of Sea Lights and discuss this new rollout. And here's my conversation with them.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel. Welcome to another TechStrong TV segment. My guests for this segment are my friends from Sea Light, Aaron Scher and Chris Rowett. Aaron, Chris, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you so much, Alan. Great to be here.
Thank you both for being here. We've interviewed Sea Lights before in person, before COVID, when we were able to go do conferences, and again here on TechStrong TV, since COVID. but not everyone in our audience may be familiar with Sea Lights, and you guys have some new news and announcements that we're going to make today. So why don't we start off with a quick Sea Lights background, if you don't mind? Who wants to do it? Eran?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here again. A recap on Sea Lights' story. The founders, Alon Eisenman and myself, been in the enterprise software business for a long period of time. And after founding Nolio, one of the earliest continuous delivery solutions, which was later on acquired by CA, where we met our friend Chris, we understood that software development and delivery is completely changing. The speed, the velocity is completely changing, as well as the complexity. And one of the big areas which is not handled well is quality management, is the testing aspect of software. And this is how we started Sea Lights, with the vision to add quality analytics and quality intelligence into the CI/CD pipelines, into the development and delivery processes. That's what we've been doing in the past few years. With some example of intelligence is test gap analytics, is test impact analytics to expedite release cycle and development cycles. But the big news we have today is we spend a lot of time with customers over the past year, and actually over Zoom during the Corona time. And we understood that it's even bigger than that. It's bigger than that. And what's bigger, and we call it software quality governance. This is actually the new way to manage quality within modern development organization. We're going to talk about it today.
Fantastic. And then, listening to Eran, Chris, you were with CA, it seems, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I worked at CA for 7 years, kind of in the DevOps groups within CA. So my job was helping large enterprises go through the transformation from their traditional, waterfall approach to adopting agile, putting in fully automated CI/CD pipelines, and understanding what that transformation looks like, on the journey to becoming a digital enterprise. So I had the privilege of, working with many enterprises around the world as they went on, the digital transformation journey. The hard bit being the transformation, culturally, what does that mean? What does it mean organizationally? What does it mean eventually for processes and tools that you need to put in to take advantage of that? During that journey, I met Eran and the team. We acquired Nolio as part of our portfolio of CI/CD tools that we could take to help accelerate the software development life cycles of those customers. And I joined Sea Lights, I think 6 months ago now. So I run the customer success team. So I'm at the coalface with the customers who are trying to improve their quality, improve quality governance, trying to understand, as they've now gone from, maybe a single QA department to democratizing it across DevOps teams, across DevOps pipelines, how now we can make quality a first-class citizen in everything we do, because, as we all know, customer experience, the speed at which we can bring innovation, the quality of that innovation defines our position in the market. As we go through, I can definitely share a lot of insights of the journey some of our enterprise customers are going through and the challenges they're facing in trying to make that transition.
Excellent. So software quality governance, right? Why this? Why now? Let's start with that.
So that's a very good question. I think what we're seeing in the market, that everyone understood that they need to go to DevOps. This is the new standard. And the enterprises, by the way, the movement to enterprise DevOps, it's not just happening, it's accelerating. Now, when organizations are moving to DevOps, to company-wide DevOps practices, what's happening is that their quality management practices no longer fit for purpose. This is where the traditional quality management breaks. You don't have the right organizational structures. As Chris mentioned, now quality activities are being distributed among developers, team leaders, product owners, DevOps, test automation engineers, SREs. It's all over. No one is really can manage quality in these environments. Now, what is the essence of quality management, of the traditional quality management? The essence of it is to identify quality risks and then have the ability to prioritize it, communicate it to the relevant people so you can take proper action. In the past, the QA manager used to do that, right? You'd have quarterly releases and annually releases. The QA manager would gather the information, would make sure that the right tests are being executed, that the quality of the tests are at the right level, collecting the test result, analyzing the test result, and eventually coming with a recommendation to the development team, to the product team about can we release or not release. It's no longer happening with the huge amount of builds, with the frequency of builds, with the huge number of tests that are being executed. Companies are moving now to microservices. You have additional, dozens of or hundreds of pipelines. You cannot make those decisions. Actually, when you're moving to enterprise DevOps, companies lost their ability to identify quality risks and also to analyze them and prioritize them, and as well as communicate it to the relevant people. And for example, when you're a developer and you're going to do a commit or a merge of your code, you need to understand what are the quality risks. Is it safe or not safe? And it's not just if the test pass or fail. You need more data than that. If you're a Scrum Master and you're at the end of the sprint, is the sprint done or not done? The definition of done has been reached or not on the quality standards. Can we do it or not do it? Same for the product owner. When you're looking at the user story or an epic, is it done? Is it at the right quality level? You don't have the data anymore. You don't have the quality risk. You cannot identify, assess, and communicate those quality risks to the relevant people. And this is what quality governance is all about, is the ability to identify quality risks, analyze, prioritize, and communicate the quality risk to all the relevant stakeholders, all the consumers, at as early as possible, exactly at the point where they need it. And that's what's quality governance. It's empowering the entire organization to get the quality risk assessment and make decisions based on it.
So I like this very much, and I think one of the areas that it hits is that, we've seen a bifurcation, a cleaving, between what we used to call Q&A, quality and assurance, and testing. There was a time where Q&A was testing, right? When we said, it has to go through Q&A, it meant we were going through testing. In the DevOps space, for better or worse, and I think there's a lot for better, as well as maybe for worse, testing has become independent of QA. With testing, we spend a lot of time on how can we automate testing, right? What can we automate? What shouldn't we automate? We maybe spend a little less time on what should we test. We do testing for testing's sake rather than testing for QA's sake. And so, we've lost that connection between QA and testing. We test like we're just, checking the boxes in essence, right? And we forget quality, that it's at the end of the day, the reason we test is about quality. At the end of the day, security is about quality, right? Because insecure is low quality. And so I think this is a great concept, a great way we need organizations to look at putting the Q back in Q&A, right, in testing. The issue or the question I have for you is, is this going to be too big a change for enterprise teams? In other words, we're asking them to change the way they're doing these things, maybe. Now, they may want this change because no one raises their hand and says, "Oh no, I don't want more quality," right? Everyone wants more quality, but what is it going to take on their part to put this in effect?
So let me address that. I think so what the conversations we're having with our enterprise customers is at the senior levels. Exactly agree with you that they all want better quality, and they have strategic initiatives to improve quality, and they're trying to put in better processes and better metrics, and to get the teams to treat it more seriously. Because I agree with you, there is a distinction between quality and testing. In a lot of organizations, testing is seen as a necessary, almost tax on development, right? We test because we must, because we need a quality output to survive. But we don't necessarily know if we're doing the right testing. We don't know, where the biggest risks are, where the biggest gaps are. And so, we can decide to build much bigger regression test suites, and we can do all those things, but all of those cost time and money. And are we getting return on investment on those? So when we're looking at software quality governance, what we're trying to look at is, firstly, is the organization want to be a world-class quality organization? And the digital world says it must be. So the answer to that, should be yes. The second, which was your question specifically, was, what transformation are they going to have to do to then change their processes, maybe tweak the roles, change maybe what tools and insights they get to enforce that? And I'm seeing in my customer conversations a huge appetite for that information, for that change. They want to know, not just how to automate tests or to make them quicker. They want to know which tests to automate first, which are the highest risks, the things they should mitigate first. They want to know how to prevent bad code getting into source code control in the first place. They want to know what's running in production that's mission critical that maybe has never been tested, right? So giving them that level insight allows them to make better decisions about where to invest their limited resources, so they get maximum bang for the buck on closing those quality gaps, closing those quality risks. That comes hand in hand with a desire to improve the actual quality governance itself. So per each software, when you look at the software development lifecycle and you think about the various processes developers and testers go through, the pull request, committing some code, getting a code reviewer to decide whether it's safe enough to put into the main branch or not, or the release process. Is the code good enough? Is it a good enough quality so I can promote it from the dev environment to the integration test environment, or even push it all the way into production? So each one of those requires a quality process. There's particular personas that have, governance over those decisions. And what they need is better insights. They need the right insight at the right time. So they're making a much richer and more accurate decision about the risks they're actually holding when they say release, or yes, I approve the commit, or those sorts of things. So the conversations we're having in twofold. One is, how do we provide them those better insights through the pipeline? The second is much more around what is the correct, what are the mature quality governance processes you need to adopt, you need to implement, and you need to enforce in your organizations, so that even if you've got the insights, they're actually being used to make better decisions on a daily basis. So there's a big piece of work that's going in around what should governance look like in a enterprise DevOps scale organization for each persona involved and for each of those processes. And then there's tooling like C-Lights, which will give them the insights so that each of those points where they're enforcing governance, they've got the right information.
Perfect. Love it. Okay. So let's talk, brass tacks, as we say, right? This is something you're rolling out now. What exactly? It's a SaaS-based program, I'm assuming. Some sort of, what's involved in actually a company watching out here says, man, we need to do this. How do they go about it?
Okay, so it's a cloud-based solution. It's actually built on the same C-Lights platform where we're extending it to with the new capabilities. Simply go to our website, and we start by having a demo of the product. Then they can try the product. They can do a proof of concept, proof of value of the product, and then implement it. But as mentioned, it's a cloud-based solution. It has plugins to the CIs. It has an agent that helps to understand the tests while they're running, so we can collect the proper data to take those insights. And then, as all the modern company, a lot of APIs, so you can get this data to your other systems in order to consume the data.
So let me just, so that our audience is clear, the C-Lights website, is it C-Lights? I forget now. Is it clights.io, or what was the website?
Yeah, clights.io. Yeah.
That's what I thought it was, but I wanted to make sure. So it's clights.io is the beginning journey for this. And then give the audience an idea how, I mean, it's not a free solution, obviously. No one's saying it is. How is it priced? Based upon how many seats, how many users, how many applications? How is it?
We try to make it as simple as possible, and it's basically according to the size of your application. So it's basically per amount of lines of code. The more lines
per amount of code. Got it.
Yeah, bigger applications, you grow with the application. Yeah.
And then, guys, let's talk, Chris and Eran. Obviously you're rolling this out now, but you've exposed some customers to it. It's been kind of battle tested a little bit. What have you been hearing from the field on this?
So I think the feedback we've had has been universally very positive, which is obviously what our product group want to hear as we're market testing some new ideas. I think the reason for that is because it aligns very strongly with the big quality initiatives that a lot of big enterprises are going through. I've even today earlier I was on a call with a Fortune 100 global financial services organization, and they've got a huge operation around just lifting the bar on quality, right? You can imagine how much infrastructure and systems and code and those things they've got, and they have to be delivering a quality product through all the channels that they go to market. So if you are in charge of quality in that sort of organization, today it's very unlikely you've got the level of detail and insights that you need to make in a reasonable cost useful decisions to ensure that quality is an ever rising bar. And so solutions like C-Lights and what we're taking to those conversations is saying, we can help bring you the insights so that if you imagine in your enterprise DevOps pipeline, every build, every test stage, every deployment, we are monitoring, we are understanding, exactly across the entire code base, which test covers which method, both during unit testing, integration testing, all the way through, even into production, where we can show actually in production which methods actually get executed as customers touch their systems and services, and which ones of those have been tested. I'm sure it won't shock you that much, but many enterprises have code running in production where there's critical methods that have never had a single test go through them. So that end-to-end insight that says right from the beginning of the pipeline to commit through to something in production, per build, for every test stage, we've got the analytics and the insight to show exactly what the test coverage is, not just of existing code, but for every new change. So, developers putting in new changes all the time. Are they all tested? Are they covered before they get into production? So the ability to have that insight, and then more importantly, at each different process to say, well, as a code reviewer, before the code gets checked in, can I prove it's been properly, the unit tests exist and they've actually covered every new method or every change method? As a release manager? Can I ensure that before we promote this in the pipeline or production, all the quality risks are understood and mitigated? At the end of sprint, when I'm doing my retrospective, do I have a good view to say, well, how much is our quality really improving? The question of, do I have the right tests? Did they actually cover everything that changed in the pipeline? And if not, what are the biggest risk areas that I should prioritize to build out and improve my test library for the next sprint? And then maybe as a test manager across all of my pipelines, which teams have got good quality? Which teams are growing? Which teams are aggressively closing quality risks and being higher priority? And when you start thinking how you might aggregate that across a large organization with dozens of teams and hundreds of pipelines, now we've actually got real data that's driving insights to help understand where they need to focus next. Which teams, which pipelines, which technologies, where are my gaps? And it's not necessarily just test risks. It might be, compliance, audit, other things that we need to be ensuring are happening in these pipelines. They're all types of quality risks that we want to understand, give insight, so that those plethora of different persona at the right time, at point of time, can get the insights to make better decisions. So that's the journey that we're helping organizations on. And the C-Lights platform is extending to cover more and more types of risk and more personas. But the things I described, that we have that now, and we have customers on the journey with us.
Excellent. Guys, we're over time. I'm sorry, go ahead, Aran. I'll give you the last word.
To add to Chris, this is just the beginning. If we're looking at the vision, the big vision of software quality governance, on these core elements of code changes, because that's what's driving CI/CD, right? Code changes that are flying from development to production. We're going to add more and more data. For example, the APM data, production usage, GitOps usage,
I was going to ask you about that, because more and more the action is taking place in the Git level, right? The CI/CD, by the time it's deployed, it's all baked. It's in Git and GitOps where we're seeing this, where this needs to live, right, to a certain extent. So yeah,
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, combining so much, think about defects and defect history, data from ITSM, from tickets, issues. You can combine so much data. Now, it's very hard to do that because you need the data structures and to correlate the right data on top of the basic data that we have. But this is how it's going to grow. And that's going to give you, I would say, a very accurate quality risk, and to drive the vision also of autonomous testing, autonomous quality, holistic quality, end-to-end. But this is a big journey. It's how quality is going to be managed in the next decade.
Excellent. Guys, congratulations with this. I love the concept. I think I told you that the first time we spoke. It'd be interesting. We'll watch how this rolls out and how people are adopting. Come back and keep us posted. Update us on what's happening, okay?
Will do.
Certainly will do.
All right. Chris Rowett, Aran Sher, C-Lights, clights.io. Here on TechStrong TV, this is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
So last week we brought you the first episode of a new show we're doing here on TechStrong TV, and that is the Cyber Hero Adventures show with Gary Berman. Gary's the host and co-producer with us. Gary does a great job on his show. He has some amazing guests. This is episode 2 that we're doing here on TechStrong TV. Gary has a great show lined up today. Let's go.
Internet, often referred to as the Internet of Things. Stay tuned to find out more. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed, so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. As the victim of a series of cyber attacks, I've learned that the only time that you hear about hacking or cybersecurity is when the criminals win. Well, not anymore. Let's begin by saying thank you to today's panel of unsung cyber heroes who represent the countless people who toil in anonymity to keep us safe at home, work, and school. Jeff Schaefer is the VP of Client Engagement and Business Development at Aon Cyber Solutions. Jeff will share stories of real-life insider threats during his time with both Aon and 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service and much more. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Great, it's so great to have you. Thank you so much. Francis Chianfroka founded Bayshore Networks and Inside Cyber, 2 visionary companies in the industrial IoT cybersecurity space. He is the inventor of both platforms. He is recognized as an IoT industry visionary and evangelist, trusted by Fortune 100 CIOs and CSOs. He guides Inside Cyber's technology vision, provides critical strategic direction, directs customer relationships, and inspires the executive and technical management teams. You certainly have inspired me, Francis. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Gary. Thank you, and we're looking forward to a heroic conversation.
And by the way, I'll do the comedy. You focus on cybersecurity. that way we stay in our lanes. Does that work?
Yeah, it works.
Our next guest is Curtis Blount, the CISO of Inside Cyber. He has more than 30 years of experience in information security, IT and OT, risk management, regulatory compliance, and cloud cybersecurity. As the CISO, he has built global cybersecurity engineering architectures with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. Curtis' forte, and a key area of his focus at Inside Cyber, is cyber and corporate risk management. Hey, Curtis. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So are we. You know, Curtis, we're going to learn a lot about what you do, on today's show. But I would like to ask, why do you do it? What is your mission? And tell us your origin story.
Most of us in the security space have a passion for it. We live it, we eat it, we breathe it every single day, not only on the business side of the house, but also in our personal lives as well. So for me, like I said, I've been in it for 30 some odd years now. And I actually started out in the US military back in the early 80s during the ARPANET days. So that was my first kind of instance into the security realm. And then from there, it just blossomed. So I've been blessed to have a wonderful career spanning, a couple of decades of information security and now transitioning into cybersecurity now. But like I said, for most of us, it's a passion. You talk to us, you'll hear the passion that we talk about when, we talk about hacks and cybersecurity and threats and risk management. What do you need to do to help protect yourself? For us, it's a culture, and we love it. We eat it. We breathe it every single day.
One of the most amazing things that I've experienced in my kind of Forrest Gump journey into cybersecurity over the last several years is this service as a motivation. You use the word passion. What I have experienced is that you all are the defenders of the digital universe. I mean, you're the good people. And one of the other things that I notice is you all are humble. And so you've done some pretty cool stuff. Tell us a little bit about, some of the things that you've done in the trenches.
Yeah, in the trenches. So, well, I can't talk about the military stuff, so we won't go there.
Wait. I'm okay with it if you are. I'd like to get my first scoop from the DoD or something if you don't mind.
No, well, I will tell you that I was actually one of the very first engineers that was assigned to do DoD launches for the space shuttle program.
Wow.
So, we did a lot of the DoD launches between 1984 through 91, I would say. Mostly all classified launches. So part of that classified launch is actually now what we know as GPS, or the Global Positioning Satellite Systems. Back then, it was more of a classified launch. So, but now it's more transition to the commercial space. But that's one aspect of it. I built out e-commerce platforms for Merrill Lynch, HSBC, Morgan Stanley, on the financial side of the house. One of the cool things that we actually worked on, this is back in right after 1999, we actually worked on a program that actually merged all the old Cirrus networks and Plus networks, which still exist today for ATMs and credit card transactions. Those networks never went away. We just created a platform that interfaced all three of those networks together. So now if you go to any ATM machine, you can just plug in whether it's your Amex card, MasterCard, American Express, Visa, and be able to make a transaction very easily. So, technology has really expanded over the last 10 to 12 years, and now we're starting to see this major influx of IoT. There are several different IoT points that we should probably take a look at and consider. You have industrial IoT, which is all of the RFID tags and hard handheld scanners and things like that. And then you have the commercial IoT side of the house, where you have your smart homes and your mobile devices and all those things. So think about it as time goes on, from the aspect of when I started, we were still on these massive mainframe systems, now to these little small handheld devices in less than 30 years time frame. It's an amazing achievement that we've accomplished here.
Indeed, and it has the associated risk, which I can't think of a better person to share with us than Francis. And so Francis, tell us your origin story and your mission. Why do you do what you do?
So my mission, what I would like to do, is basically to make the world safe for digital transformation that comes from the IoT and from artificial intelligence. And I think of, Curtis was just telling you all these great stories, about going through these last several decades and watching technology grow up and get more extensive and more self-contained and smaller and more ubiquitous, and that just opens up a massive attack surface. What I want to do by my mission is, I want to make it so that all of cyberspace, cyber physical space, right, which is, we think of it as computer places. No, it's just where every information infrastructure and every business infrastructure is just now cyber, okay? And it needs to become self-healing and self-protecting. Okay, that's my mission. I want to see enough capability migrate, disseminate ubiquitously within our cyber physical spaces to the point that they will be resilient and assured proper operation and personal safety as well as data privacy. And I think that's going to require several generations of technology past what we have now. My origin story, really quick, I'm a software guy and an entrepreneur. I've started a number of companies, including Insight Cyber Group with Curtis. And I've got a long-standing background since high school of working on what we now call cyber physical systems. I used to hand make the instrumentation cables for early DCS systems, what are called in oil refineries, and pharmacology studies. And that's before we had TCP/IP networks. All right.
Wow.
Industrial control systems in the mid-90s started migrating from serial bus RS-485 buses to Ethernets, for a lot of interesting reasons, but all of a sudden now they're computer networks, right? And so that's how the cyber physical revolution was born. Now we're talking about IoT, which had its genesis perhaps as a buzzword, maybe 8 or 10 years ago at the most, but the pathway to that has been going for a good long time, and that's where my background is.
You know, Jeff, Francis just used a very interesting phrase, self-healing. Can you share with us a little bit about your thoughts regarding healthcare and IoT devices and the safety of digital medical devices? Are they hackable?
I just noticed, look at everybody laughing. Are they hackable?
Wait. I wasn't trying to be funny.
So I would, that's a good question. So pretty much everything is probably hackable. If you want to put the time and effort and financial backing behind it, the answer is yes. As we've seen pretty much with most IoT devices that have come out, fairly quickly the bad guys are looking and have come up with ways around those. I mean, you can look at thermostats and medical devices and insulin pumps and other things, and that's just a couple off the top of my head that have been compromised and done so pretty quickly. I always go back to the story of when the iPhone, and they put the fingerprint to open up the iPhone. I think it was 72 hours before a group in Germany found a way around that. Mm-hmm. So as the new technology comes out, we're always very, very quick to implement it, particularly in our homes, because of the convenience and the charm factor that they have. Oh, look what you can do, and you get these alerts on your phone. And we're implementing these things, I think, ahead of security and ahead of proper implementation. The self-healing is a great concept, and part of that is visibility. And I talk to clients all the time about having visibility into these devices, and it's all your devices. And you know, you used to say, I think it still holds true. Christmas time comes around, everyone gets all these new toys, and they want them on the network, and then your IT department's then tasked with, hey, secure these things. We're going to use them, so you better secure them, not secure them so we can use them. That's kind of chicken before the egg thing. My origin story is I love technology and new and emerging technology. After 25 years of Secret Service, 17 of those were in the area of cyber. It was, okay, I love the new technology, but so do the bad guys, and how are they trying to compromise these things? So they're always looking at ways around them or ways to use them for nefarious things. So we were looking at stopping that and helping put them away once we could find them and arrest them. So that's my origin story. And I like technology anyway, and then it's a matter of think like the bad guys, and how are they going to try to use this and use it in a bad way.
Indeed. And Francis, how many connected devices are there now? And what are some of the projections for the future? And just your best estimate.
It's all over the map, and I would have given you a different answer a few months ago. Certainly billions easily today. How many people are there? 7 billion or 8 billion now, right? So this is it's an awfully big number. Hundreds of millions is a very safe guess. Now, as to the future, you got to consider who you're talking to, because different people have an interest in seeing these outcomes. I've seen numbers like 30 billion. Connected devices over the next 10 to 20 years. Well, what's a connected device? They can be extremely small. All right, once network access and network acquisition capability grows up to the point that you can have like a $4 thermocouple, all right, have an IP address and easily acquire a network, then it's essentially unlimited. All right, and it's a tremendous space. So just think, you know, whatever the biggest number that you could possibly imagine would be plausible, it'll be a bigger number than that.
Wow. That's really unbelievably interesting. And it just
Well,
seems
I
like,
think- yeah, I was going to say, I would just add to that, and not to cut you off, Gary, sorry about that. I mean, if you look at, there's not an industry out there that doesn't either have or is looking at implementing IoT. I mean, Curtis mentioned industrial, you have fleet maintenance. Gary, you mentioned healthcare, education, the home, monitoring devices. There's really not an industry out there that isn't looking at IoT or hasn't already implemented it. So that number, like I said, it's only going to go up.
and so Curtis, just to build on Jeff and Francis' point, you know, so the attack surface is going to be, you know, exponentially increasing on a scale of 1 to 100, you know, 1 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. How secure is the average IoT device, and why do you think that?
The average IoT device, I would probably say -10.
-10. Well, you know, one of the you just did a breakthrough for our show, because over my left-hand corner you're going to see what I'm actually thinking, and it's going to be this sort of animated thing like, what, you know.
Well, let me explain that. And actually, Jeff kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago. You know, everything is hackable. You're going to have a breach no matter what. There is no true secure environment out there. It is the level of risk management and processes that you put in place to protect yourself to minimize those risks. So with the billions and billions and billions of connected devices out there, there are so many different aspects that you have to consider. Let's talk about the IoT space and the millions of devices that are currently out there for industrial IoT. You can put minimized or minimal controls around those because you control those environments to a certain degree. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be completely safe. It's the aspect of knowing that you're going to have an incident or, you know, a breach, and what do you do to minimize the effect of that breach? How much downtime are you going to have? How much incident response planning have you done to actually protect that? That's on one side of the house. On the commercial side of the house, oh boy, good luck.
wait, Curtis, good luck was not on the scale. So
I know it's not on this scale.
Actually, you've done that twice now. You know, there was no -10, and there's not good luck, although I wish it to everyone. From 1 to 100.
I give it probably 2. And
wow.
And the reason why I say this, because this is something that Francis and I have been discussing, you know, over the last, you know, couple of months. It's about the cognitive ability to understand and assess risk. And what that basically means is that from a mental perspective, think of the consumer space and how they perceive security, not only in their own homes, but also in their private lives as well. You have to take that cognitive aspect into consideration to say, okay, do they have the, I hate to say it, but the intelligence to actually put forth the measurable amount of security controls in place to protect their homes from, let's say, for their smart devices or the mobile phones or things like that. And unfortunately, we live in a society, especially here in the US, where we don't necessarily take security as serious as we do. Internationally, that's a different story altogether, especially in Europe because of the privacy laws, specifically around GDPR. But here in the US, it's kind of, you know, whatever, you know, and we kind of just keep things moving. And it's a shame, it really is. But to go back to that point I mentioned earlier, you're going to get hacked. There's going to be an incident. It's how you respond to that incident is determines whether or not you're going to have a success or you're going to have a complete failure. If you look at, let's say, the breaches that we had in the past, Target, Home Depot, and a few others out there, it's how they responded to the breach which impacted the market value of the company overall versus, well, they had a breach. Well, yeah, everybody's going to have a breach no matter what. But again, how did you respond to it? What was your response to it, and how did you take care of that breach? That is the most key, most critical factor.
Oh, that's a great insight. Just to build on what Curtis is saying, Francis, given, of course, COVID-19 and everybody working and going to school, from home, how do you assess the cybersecurity posture of the United States, and what can people do to protect themselves?
Okay, so that's just an enormous question, and when we think about it every day.
Well, it's a 30-minute show. I mean, so
right.
you just.
We certainly want to get Jeff's perspective on the medical aspects of this, since you mentioned COVID. One of the things to point out, by extending something Curtis said. Think about those headline hacks, right? Like Target, Sony, Maersk, right? Some of the highest profile incidents that produce massive impacts in companies came through the OT side. Okay, you think about HVAC systems that are, and Curtis, you and I, we've walked a bunch of those.
Yeah, we have.
We put our, walked through with our hard hats on, and actually looked at those things, and it is the case that the OT systems, which are never designed for security, and that's another big topic, but they present vulnerabilities through which you can exploit them and then bounce off into the IT space, and then start doing things like stealing credit cards and executing classical exploits in that realm. So IoT and OT are, in essence, they're highly impactful in their own right, and that's another topic, but they also present another attack vector for getting into IT space. And I'll bet you Jeff has some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, Jeff, one of the things that you spend a great deal of time and effort on with your team is incident response. Can you share with our audience, what is the first thing you do when you get that, 3 a.m. call?
Boy, there's so many places I want to go here.
Coffee.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, before you get that call, and both Francis and Curtis touched on it, I don't care what you do in life, if you're playing piano or playing football, if you're not practicing, you're not going to be very good at it.
Yeah.
So if you haven't taken the initiative to figure out, what do I have, what needs protected, and when it doesn't, when the protection breaks down and something doesn't work, are we going to be able to respond to it in a fast manner and get things back up and running, right? Business continuity, we need to get back up. Other than the administrative things that I have to do, we talk about cyber insurance and outside counsel and things that you're going to need to have in the event of a compromise. Hopefully, if it's a client of ours already, we are already familiar with their network. We know what they have on-prem, we know what they have in the cloud, we know what their capabilities are. Again, this comes down to practicing it with either tabletop exercises or something like that. But the first thing I want to know is, what capabilities do you have, and what have you done so far to mitigate and stop this, and where do your capabilities end? When do you need the experts on Aon's team? When do you need the malware reverse engineer guys, the log analysis guys, the disk forensics guys that can go in there and figure out, okay, this is your patient zero, this is what happened, this is how they got in, let's close that, and let's make sure there's no persistence in there, because if you start standing everything up again and the persistence is there, it's just going to happen all over again. And we see that a lot, and that's one of the things we have, and that's why you practice. Is you can't just go to your backups and put everything back up again if it's going to get re-encrypted or it's going to happen again. So you have to make sure that those are clean, and you're never going to be able to do that, at least not well and efficiently, if you're not practicing it. So again, having the proper visibility in these IoT and other devices, and knowing what they have and what they can do and what they can't do, and having that visibility, and then having a response plan and practicing it is just key.
Indeed. And Francis, maybe you can share with our audience, do you do tabletop exercises, or you have cyber ranges, or how do you help protect people?
Well, cyber range is a pretty interesting and somewhat esoteric practice area. There's a handful of people that are doing it. You know, I want to connect that to one thing that Jeff has now mentioned 2 or 3 times, which is visibility, right? If you're going to really be a cyber defender, all right, if you're going to provide for high assurance of operations, resilience and robustness in the face of inevitable compromise, you got to know what you have on the ground. And I think that's really the key to it. And here's why. I mean, there's an issue of basic economics here. I mentioned before, right? Yeah, what's the most basic kind of a physical sensor? Thermocouple, temperature sensor, okay? It's a 50-cent part. Okay, I used to walk into meetings when I did presentations. I'd pull one out of my pocket, right? Here it is, like, you know, dangling on this little, you know, yellow wire. It's a Type K thermocouple. Well, you know, there's going to be tens of thousands of them in your average, you know, chemical plant, for example. And they are becoming connected devices because there's so much value to centralizing and analyzing and operationalizing the data that they throw off. You're not ever putting this genie back in the bottle, but what you're also never going to do is take a $2 or a $4 part and put a $30 compute stack on it with security software. Okay, that's not going to happen. So the point with all that is, you know, your devices, the infrastructure on which everybody's running their business. Okay, and now think about this from another perspective. You don't control it all. Curtis made a point about that. Okay, in environments like a manufacturing facility, you can have some control. Well, what about when you walk into a building? We walk into a commercial building, and we've done this and found that the HVAC systems are on the same networks as your iPad acquires when you walk in.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so you know, to Jeff's point, you know, to give you know, come to the answer here, visibility is incredibly important, but that is a scale problem. Okay, there's no way. I mean, CISOs, and I you know, Curtis will tell you this, you know, 10 times. One of the big challenges that they face is so much security technology, so many firewalls, MSSPs, and IDS, IPS systems, and they're throwing off so much logging that we spawned a whole industry, the SIM industry, just to manage that and query all that stuff. Okay, well, that's crazy. All right, you're talking about expanding the surface out for IoT, it tentuples it. Okay, it's already an unsolvable problem to have visibility the way we typically do it. So that means there is absolutely a role for automation. And when you consider that you can't put security stacks onto IoT devices that are so cheap, okay, it swamps the economic value. You got to recognize that this is wide open surface, and we are, you know, thinking very hard about technologies that we can put in place at high scale that are going to give visibility that's, you know, that's passed through some artificial intelligence, so that you get the insights with context and only the things that are really predictive of an attack. And Jeff is in the insurance business. Now, Curtis and I come out of the security business. Security people like to say, well, I got to be right 100% of the time. The bad guy only needs to be right once. Wrong way to think about it. Okay, that's the old-fashioned security model, which is, you know, 100%. Okay, I love the insurance industry's model where Jeff comes from, you know, in his current life, right, where you basically cover yourself up to 98% and you underrate the remaining 2%. Okay, and I think with an AI-based high-scaling visibility approach, you know, we can learn how to observe very subtle signals that are behavioral anomalies across all of these devices that are, you know, 98% of the time they're going to predict, okay, when somebody is doing recon in your network before they trigger an exploit, and you can stop them and remediate them. And we call that proactive, a proactive approach to security rather than today's reactive approach. And that's what's needed. And if you get to like 2%, you know, if you can cover all, but if you can pre-detect and proactively remediate 98% of the problems that are going to show up, I'll go to Aon, to Jeff's company, and buy an insurance policy to cover me for the remaining 2%, and I'll call it a day.
Well, that's incredibly interesting. And just to clarify for our audience, Jeff, do you want to amplify a little bit about what you do at Stroz Friedberg? Because Jeff is not directly in the insurance part, so I just want to give Jeff a chance to clarify, his role. But we take your point, Francis. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I can tell you, since Aon's acquisition of Stroz Friedberg, I've learned a lot about insurance. So, yeah, I'm not on the insurance side of the house. Certainly know a lot of the guys. I work with a lot of the guys over there that broker the insurance, and then of course we work with the carriers when an incident does occur. But yeah, being able to do exactly that and get the insurance for that part that you can't necessarily get coverage for the stuff that you can't take care of yourself is what it's all about. And then using them if and when a compromise occurs. So, yeah, I mean, where I am now, big into the insurance, and it's growing, and it's gotten to the point now where when cyber insurance first started coming out, only the big dogs could have it because it was so expensive. It's not the case anymore. There are very small and medium-sized companies that there are policies for them as well. And again, like I said, both on the proactive side, having come from Secret Service, and now with Aon Cyber Solutions, let's prevent it from happening first. That's the goal. So all that proactive stuff, the tabletops, the code review, the assessments, the pen testing, all that kind of stuff needs to be done. And I get that you can be assessed to death and you can be overcovered with insurance or whatever, but those things have to be done and then, like I said, and then testing your incident response when they fail. And like I've said, if it's a state-sponsored or organized crime and they want you, they're going to get you.
Yeah.
And you need to have a response plan in place, and it needs to be tested.
Indeed. As everyone can tell, we can go on for hours and hours, and as we're kind of wrapping up, Curtis, is there anything else that you'd like to add to amplify your mission?
Sure. Just wanted to bring out one particular point that both Francis and Jeff actually mentioned, and that's really around the cyber insurance aspect of this and protecting that 2%. As a CISO, one of our main jobs also is to educate, and we're educating the governing bodies, mainly the C-suites and the executive boards, on security and cybersecurity. And I can't tell you how many times where I've gone into a board meeting where I've actually sat in front of a CIO and tried to explain to him cybersecurity, and he says to me, well, we have breach insurance, so don't worry about it. And my response to him is that while you might have breach insurance to cover you, breach insurance doesn't cover everything. From a regulatory standpoint and also from a legal standpoint, if you have not do your due diligence to protect your environment and adhere to your own security policies, if you have a breach based on those security policies, then breach insurance is not going to cover you.
Right.
So, and now you're talking about major revenue impact. So from that particular perspective, we have to explain, and we also have to teach people about the different aspects of cybersecurity. We've talked about, IoT, and we've alluded to the aspect of, the different environments out there. But ultimately, from Francis's point, from Jeff's standpoint, and from my standpoint, we're educators as well as security guys. We're consistently explaining and trying to get people to understand security is everybody's responsibility.
Well, just on that point, we are very fortunate. We've just recently signed a joint venture with an Israeli cybersecurity firm to bring our animated characters to life in virtual 3D and 2D on laptops and phones, really just with a curriculum of basic cyber hygiene. Because one of the things I've listened and learned from, and Curtis, to see if you think this is valid, is that it's the 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the capital allocation in this ecosystem is for technology related solutions, but 80% of the attacks are from simple human error. Is that a valid premise?
Yes, an absolute valid parameter. I think I mentioned earlier the cognitive aspect of this.
Right.
Because the one thing that we're missing, even on the enterprise risk management side of the house, is where I sit right now, is looking at the human mind and the human element of risk. how we perceive risk on the commercial side of the house, because we're so in depth in the Facebooks of the world and the Instagrams of the world, we don't necessarily take a look at our own security as a high value target. So it's low probability, high value. And because of that aspect, that's where the hackers can actually go after. They go after that human element. Social engineering is another aspect to that. So we really, really have to educate people and continue to do so, to explain to them, not only is it your responsibility, but you have to take your own security seriously.
Indeed. And on a lighter note, one of the things that I kind of adopted as my North Star when recovering from this series of attacks and the consequences was a quote by Albert Einstein. And he famously, a reporter asked him, he said, "Mr. Einstein, on one hand, you have science and physics and mathematics and that. And on the other hand, there are many people who believe in like the possible existence of a higher authority or God." And Einstein, famously replied, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." So Curtis, can you share, and I'm going to ask all three of you to end here. Curtis, can you share an Einstein moment, with our audience in your life?
Oh boy, I have too many of them. Like I said, for me, I'm kind of the in the trench kind of guy, so I'm an operations guy at heart. And having said that, there have been many times where I think probably the biggest one for me is 1998. I sat in a meeting with Merrill Lynch and American Express, and we talked about business continuity. And right up the street, and this is in New York City, of course, and right up the street is our major data center, literally a mile up the street on West Side Avenue, on West Side Highway, excuse me. And I explained to them, we need to move our data center. Oh, no, it's fine. We can leave it right there. And I said, karma is going to bite us in the butt if we don't move this. A few years later, we had 9/11, which ironically, I was in the South Tower when the planes hit, because I actually worked on the 35th floor. And as most people might not know, when the North Tower fell, it fell on the World Financial Center on the American Express side, and it scraped the building. The 6th floor was the data center for American Express.
Wow.
If we had just taken the aspect of looking and say, okay, worst case scenario, we probably would have been able to save that data center and save millions and millions and millions of dollars at the same exact time.
Wow.
Across the street from that was the AT&T switching facility for the New York Stock Exchange, as well as all the other financial services companies in the New York area. That was World Trade 7. We lost that as well. So for me, it was that kind of hindsight moment, that I guess, that Einstein moment where, now when I look at security and I look at risk, for me, it's always worst case scenario, then we build upon that versus, I'm not going to worry about it. It probably won't happen. If we say this probably won't happen, more than likely it will happen.
Wow, thanks for sharing that incredible story. And you are the example of the unsung heroes that we want to shine the light on, to say thank you. Francis, I'm not sure how you're going to top that. Do you have an Einstein moment?
I'm gonna ask Curtis, because I know the answer to this. What happened to the Merrill Lynch data center? Where is it now?
It is now, part of it's actually in AWS, and the other aspect now is in Somerset, New Jersey.
There you go.
So
I remember, Curtis. So this is not just an Einstein moment. This is a big power moment for you, because you actually, you were right, and all the Wall Street firms except for Goldman, which was moved from east side to west side. Everybody else moved their headquarters out of Manhattan. And,
Yes, they did.
you know, so that was, but I'll tell you, Gary, you know, my story is, you know, I think about, I'm going to restate it because it's such a good point. You know, you got to plan for the worst case because you'll get it. Okay. And if it's a matter of, well, business continuity, revenue protection, those are all important things to CEOs. When you look at critical infrastructure and national security, now you're talking about people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that takes the whole computation up to another level. And I often get asked, hey, Francis, you know, we hear stories about the power grid, you know, is it possible for people to take down the grid? Okay. So what I wanted to say to that was, you know, we think about this all the time. You think about cybersecurity as it relates to IT. Well, the attack surface there is basically, you know, maybe a dozen or so mainstream versions of Microsoft Windows, all right? And you've got we got thousands of hackers all around the world gunning for the same platform, looking for the same vulnerabilities. And what's their objective? Either to make trouble or to make money, okay? But when you look at critical infrastructure, okay? Very different profile. You know, we like to talk about risk. Risk mathematically is a combination. You multiply the vulnerability times the impact. Okay, so you know, on the IT side, when everybody's shooting for Windows vulnerabilities, okay, well, the vulnerability is exceptionally high. Okay, it's a uniform attack surface all across the world, and you got thousands of people shooting at it. So vulnerability is extremely high. Impact is, think about, you know, you're going to be offline, your emails are going to go be late, you know, you'll lose a database, you'll have to back it up. Okay, those are all bad impacts. Now think about it in critical infrastructure with IoT. The vulnerability is very, very low and very fragmented because you're talking about a lot of different kinds of systems, and it takes some major domain knowledge and expertise to figure out how to knock over a synchrophaser network, or, you know, take a generator offline, or disrupt the power system. That's a different category of knowledge. So the vulnerability is very low. The impact, which is the other factor to risk, is off the charts high.
Well, you know, to that end, we're going to have excuse me, have you back on another show. And coincidentally, we're recording an industrial control systems show next, and you know, we'd love to have you back. So, Jeff, you're going to have the last word.
Yeah. So I would take my last comment down to a smaller scale. And what I mean by that is, and a couple of like best practices, we've seen hackers, ransomware.
Yeah, but wait, hold on, time out. My question is, oh look, this is the first like redirection I've ever done. I'm not supposed to say that out loud, evidently, or I'm supposed to be thinking it, but Jeff, Einstein moment.
Correct, yeah. So I think it for me, it is, even your smallest companies are vulnerable, and not just vulnerable, but targeted. And that's where I was going with this. We've seen a two-person company get hit with ransomware, and the ask was for $150. So while these large-scale attacks are out there, the Einstein moment kind of to me is, you can't rely, even in your own house, on the company who gave you the device, who produced the device or the network it's on to provide security. That is up to you. And you will be targeted, even for a little bit of amount of money, or targeted to get into the larger environment from your house into the corporate network. And with kids at school and working from home and stuff like that, you're just a bigger target. So it's not so much an Einstein moment as it's just that light bulb going off, that the attack surface is right there in your house now. And if you're not taking security seriously yourself, you're going to get hit. And even if it's not hitting you, it's using you as a pivot point or as a launch point into the larger network. And that's a big concern that I have.
Wow, that's an incredibly important insight, you know, because most of the conversations that we've had so far on the show have been pertaining to, you know, B2B with some, you know, impact, potential impact on consumers. But now that everybody is all in one physical location, it's all just one story. So on that note, for more information, we'll include our guest contact information in the show notes. And Thanks so much to Jeff, Curtis, and Francis for this incredible show. If you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary at cyberheroescomics.com. Thanks so much.
Good stuff from Gary. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Up next, for something old, I wanted to use something from our Kubernetes, the Future of Kubernetes virtual event that we did last year in 2019. Tim Hawken, one of the original Google Kubernetes engineering team members, was our guest and a keynote back in 2019. And Tim is back in 2020 for our Kubernetes themed event, which is operationalizing cloud native with Kubernetes. So, and that's on, I believe it's Thursday the 1st. So with that coming up this week, I thought it'd be a good time to look back on a year ago and what was Tim's vision of what was Tim's views on the future of Kubernetes. So this is Tim Hawken from Google Cloud. All right, so Tim, first of all, thanks for being one of our keynotes on this Kubernetes Ecosystem Summit. I wanted to discuss a couple of things with you today, and I guess chronologically, let's go back to the beginning. Many people know that you were, part of the original, not the original Google engineering team, but part of the Kubernetes team. But I don't know if everyone knows it, and I don't know if really they understood what your role was. And can you give us a little bit about what your place was on that team, and kind of what was the goal there? What were you guys trying to do when this Kubernetes project first kind of took off?
So when we started all this, there was a big reorg that happened internally, and they took our cloud team and our technical infrastructure team, TI, smushed them together. And through the power of fusion, we became one team, and sort of instantaneously our goals aligned, which of course is not really what happened. But right. We had a bunch of meetings. The mission was figure out how to stop stepping on each other, how to stop duplicating each other's work, how to build a single system that serves both purposes. And so we had a series of meetings that we presented ideas at and discussed, and it was engineers from Seattle, Joe and Brendan, and engineers from down here, myself and Brian and others. And we started ideating on a bunch of just random thoughts. Right? Maybe it was Borg as a service, maybe it was something container-based, and Joe and Brendan saw what was happening with Docker, and they started to whip up this prototype. And my role at the time, I was actually working on our internal team on the node agent for Omega and Borg, which was Omelet and Borglet. When the team started to come together around Kubernetes or around containers, my first job was to figure out the node side of things. Right? What are the agents that are going to be running on the machine? What do they do? What do they do in terms of lifecycle management, in terms of storage management and networking? And so the earliest versions of Kubelet, after it came out of sort of prototype stage, was where I spent most of my time.
Absolutely. And as the sort of team coalesced and the idea of doing something around containers and, was it called even Kubernetes at that point, or K8, or was
No, the name Kubernetes came pretty late in the game. At the time, the prototype was called 7, and so people were hacking on 7, and that was really it.
It's funny that was 7 and now it's sort of K8. But this was, at this point, was there any thought of like creating an open source project that would live and exist outside of Google, or?
Absolutely. The open source was definitely part of the strategy. Once we decided that we weren't going to be shooting for an as-a-service sort of thing, it obviously had to be open source. That was the only way we were going to get traction and get buy-in from the broader community. So open source was it. From the beginning, we knew we wanted to go big with open source in a way that not a lot of projects really do, which was really to drive ownership, to get people out in the world to feel like this was their project.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that was very successful. Very strategically valuable to the project, to the success of it overall. I don't think it would be where it is if we hadn't gone big on that.
No, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue too, I think, Tim, because one of the things I've kind of observed from attending Cloud Native Con, KubeCons and these kinds of things is that really a lot of what's driving the underlying energy behind these things is open source, right? The Cloud Native and Cube movement, if you will, or the foundation behind it, right, has given the open source community a place to coalesce around, something to gather and hold up there. We had Linux before this, obviously, but this has really taken that open source community and given it a home and a voice and power like it's never had, frankly. And I can't imagine that you guys back then would think, my goodness, look what it's become.
That's true. It is definitely sort of beyond wildest expectations. You're right. Linux existed. Open source existed for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I cut my teeth on open source in the 90s, and working on Linux and early versions of Red Hat and those sorts of things. And so I grew up sort of with that ethos of like, you're just going to write code and people are going to benefit from it. And that's just the way you do things, right? Long before I ever did commercial software, I was doing open source. And then, I sort of came to Google, and I took a very different track through Google. I worked on some, internal stuff that wouldn't make sense externally, and I lost track of open source. And when I came back to Kubernetes, the world is totally different. The open source world is a very different animal than it was in the 90s, right? And there was still, open source was still there, but what we tried to do with Kubernetes was a community that was very intentional, that was very broad and deep on purpose, and not sort of by accident. And I mean no disrespect at all to the Linux community. The Linux community grew from nothing to what it is now over 20 years, right? We didn't want to wait 20 years.
Probably longer even, yeah.
Yeah, right. So we didn't want 20 years for Kubernetes to try to take off. We were trying to do something big and now and immediate. And the Linux community is sort of the result of the engineering that went into it. We wanted to start with a community first point of view, where we said the community is a big part of what makes the project successful, and that was really key to Kubernetes.
Sure. Just another quick question or two on that, and then we'll kind of fast forward to today. You mentioned that the team had sort of seen what Simon and the Docker guys were doing, and of course, Docker's not the first container. We've had Google's used Linux containers for years, and the world has used Linux containers for years, but it showed people, I think, what can be done here. Everyone started instantly, because so much in tech, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary. And I know you see something and you say, my goodness, why didn't I think of that, right? It was so elementary. And I think that's what happened with Docker. People saw immediately the potential of it, but yet there was also immediately a notion that we need something to orchestrate this. We need something to pull these containers together. And at the time, there were a lot of wannabe contenders out there in the world. Kubernetes has obviously won this race or war or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't a war. It was actually fairly cooperative. But what do you attest that to? Because I mean, even in internet time, this has happened in the beat of a Thanos snap or whatever. It's happened really quick.
Yeah. It's funny you say everybody thought that we would need this orchestration stuff. Actually, I think there was a lot of contention at the beginning of whether we would need that or not. Docker took tools that existed, right? They didn't really invent containers.
No.
In the sense the kernel technology existed. They were gluing together a dozen different bits of technology. What they nailed was a UX, a mindset, a workflow that resonated for people really deeply. Around the same time, we were open sourcing some internal tools. Literally our container stack from Google internal, we called it "Let me contain that for you," and we were open sourcing it. We hadn't quite open sourced it at the time that Docker landed. We open sourced it later in 2013, and it's the same tools, same technologies under the covers, wildly different UX, right? Like the way it approaches application development is totally different. And I think it works well for a place like Google where we control the development experience. It doesn't work so well out in the wild. And I can see that now. And it's exactly like you said, when Docker came out with your UX, and first I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Who would work this way? And then I started using it, and I realized, actually, this is really slick, right? And of course, as soon as I saw that, I played it in the context of what I already knew about Borg. I looked at Docker, and I went, well, it's like Borglet, but like prehistoric, right? But it'll get there. But you can't have Borglet without Borg. Right. And it was immediately obvious to us, those of us who'd used Borg internally, that we needed something bigger to manage all these machines. This idea of just using a single machine and using containers as a better deployment vehicle wasn't enough, right? So I think that's the bit that we added to the conversation. Docker, as on the track that it was on its way towards Swarm, which was an interesting approach to it, but we looked at it from the Borg point of view and went, not the right abstraction, right? And so we came at it from this Borg point of view, and you're right, it has happened so fast.
I'm a little older than you, Tim, but I remember the hypervisor catching on, right? And that probably took at least 4 or 5 years before you had Zen and you had obviously VMware became a monster, and the Red Hat, was it KVR or whatever, but this has happened in half the time of the hypervisor. So it's crazy now, but I think again, sometimes the stars just line up right? And I think one of the things that's helped us with Kubernetes is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and we're going to be hearing from Dan Kahn and some of the other board members of CNCF later. Did you have any insight? Obviously, I think CNCF has become a catalyst for acceleration of Kubernetes in the market. I don't want to use the term dominance, but Kubernetes' place in the market. Did you see that coming at all, or like what? If you can, just not speaking on behalf of the whole team, speaking on behalf of Tim. What did you think when the idea of, hey, let's give Kubernetes to the CNCF, to the Linux Foundation, in essence? And
that was part of the conversation really early on.
Was it?
We knew, even though we wanted to go big with open source, we knew that there's a sort of inherent mistrust of corporate-owned open source sometimes, right? And Google, honestly, had not earned a great track record with putting things out and sort of abandoning them. And so we wanted to make sure we didn't sort of fall victim to our ancestors' mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so it was really important that we get it out into a place that wasn't going to go away. Even if Google's interest dried up and blew away, that it was safe, right? And we wanted to get ownership. We wanted to get people who had full project access from like day one, right? And it was super important that you get the Red Hats and the CoreOSs and the other people who had full access. Like not just I can tinker around and send patches, but I can check things in, I can approve things. That was super important from the beginning. So the foundation, I think, was really part of the strategy. And there was a lot of discussion of, do we want the Kubernetes Foundation, or what is the scope of this thing? What are we going to call it? What is the mission really? And I think the term cloud native took a while to catch on. And even at the beginning, I remember telling it to people, and they were like, well, what does that mean, right? But I think the mindset has started to really work for people, and I think that the choice of words there was really brilliant.
I have to agree with you. So, my background is more in cybersec now, but we called it InfoSec. And I remember when cloud security first, became a thing. And so cloud native to us was readily apparent because too many people were taking, endpoint security, moving it to the cloud and saying, voila, cloud security. We knew you had to have security designed in the cloud, for the cloud, by the cloud. And I think it's gone beyond security now to software. But the other thing about it, though, is, again, who's the caboose and who's the engine here? Without Kubernetes, I don't know how much of this cloud native movement that we have today would exist.
I agree. Kubernetes, I think, was the catalyst that helps people see how things could be done. Docker was maybe the raw materials, and Kubernetes is the thing that really got the chain reaction going. Yeah. It took this idea from abstract of, we can manage your deployments for you, don't worry about it, into the really concrete of like, look, really, it's that easy. I remember doing a talk at Usenix Lisa a few years back, and I did a room full of sysadmins, classic Unix sysadmin people, right? Of which I considered myself one of. I spent a lot of time doing that, and I went up there and I basically automated 2/3 of their jobs on the stage, right? And afterwards, people came up to me and were like, "This is incredible! Like, how did you do that?" Yeah. Right? Now, of course, there was the other third who was skeptical or had really great questions or comments, and I hope that we've addressed a lot of those now. But I remember feeling really, at that moment, that day, that we hit it. We hit something.
Right. That's amazing. Let me, Tim, if you don't mind, I want to turn our interview now from backward looking to forward looking. So as we sit here now, it's the summer of 2019. The next KubeCon is actually later this month in Shanghai, and then there'll be one in San Diego in the fall, winter. Where are we going? I mean, has Kubernetes, are we in a post-Kubernetes world now, or what's the story?
We love to talk about boring infrastructure, right? That's sort of the key words. We've been quoted on these things all the time, and I think we're getting there. I hope that a couple years from now, we're not talking about what's hot in the newest release of Kubernetes. That it's sort of like the Linux kernel. Like there's some stuff in there, but the vast majority of people, the vast majority of their problems are already solved, right? And they're working with it, and new releases come out, but nobody feels urgent pressure to pick them up. That unless you're bleeding edge, right, or you're building these things, and that it's just sort of a non-issue. People don't worry about where they're getting their Kubernetes or how it looks or whether it works well. It's just a thing that you use, right? And people are focusing their energy on the exciting stuff that's happening up the stack, right? Yeah. Whether that's the service meshes. I mean, that's sort of the next thing today. So where are we going to be in 2 or 3 years? Probably beyond that, right? I mean, I hope so. There's the serverless frameworks, and there's the, you're going to build more and more abstractions up and up the stack, which just benefits users. The higher up the stack people can live, the better off they're going to be.
Agreed. And you mentioned a couple of things I wanted to hit on, service mesh and Istio, and, but all of these things, again, so much in technology is evolutionary, not revolutionary, and it's built. So we have that container Docker container, and we have the Kubernetes kind of thing on it, and now you're going to have mesh on top. But really what we're building, and I spoke about it today, I was at a conference, I think I mentioned to you in San Francisco, what we've really built here is a new OS for the data center. And that data center happens to be the cloud in most cases, but it's a new OS there that, and it was probably time, to tell you the truth, because even though we had the hypervisor, we were still running our old OSs on top of them to 95%.
We're still running our old OSs in there, right? But they're now a tiny little detail of the implementation that most users are not particularly coupled to.
No.
Right.
Right. I mean, and you know this as well as I. There was times where we'd have religious wars about even what Linux distribution you were using, right?
Yeah.
You don't hear that as much anymore with.
And now it's which cloud are you using, or which Kubernetes are you using, or which network drivers are you using, which service mesh are you using, right? People love to factionalize, and they will do that no matter what we do. If we can give them good things to argue about, like the relative merits of different systems, that's a great thing to argue about.
Better to argue about that than some of the older things we've argued about. You mentioned serverless.
Sure.
So we have we get a lot of interest on that from our audience, and some people say, well, you still need Kubernetes with serverless. Other people say not necessary, not necessarily. What's kind of your view on serverless and the Kubernetes relationship?
I don't think you need Kubernetes for serverless. I think the abstractions should be relatively sealed and hermetic. Kubernetes is a great way for serverless systems to sort of pop the hood and let users get down into the guts of things. So if you're running a serverless on top of Kubernetes, to be able to say, look, this isn't working for me anymore, I need more control, that you just sort of open the escape hatch and drop down a layer, and now you control all the pieces. Right?
No longer serverless.
Exactly. Right. But you made that choice, right? And you know sort of where the boundaries are of the different layers. I think that's a really great model to shoot for. I don't think it requires that things be Kubernetes. Like literally, they don't have to be. As long as you can capture this experience that I think users want, I think that's the win.
So I think there's two views on it. One is the user view. What you're saying is, can I capture what the users want? Great. But I think a flip side to it is, I learned this when we built an intrusion detection. We moved it to intrusion prevention, so automatic blocking. People love the idea in abstract, but in practice, I don't want you blocking anything until I made sure you really. And it's the same thing with moving to serverless. Yeah, I'll let it do that to a point, but I need to know that at the drop of a hat I can
maybe
drop back in.
I mean, I'm a big fan of systems like App Engine, right, which were like 10 plus years ahead of its time.
Yeah,
it's still an amazing system. It's just not in alignment with the rest of the industry trend right now, right? So when you look at things like Knative, right, where you capture some of the ideals of App Engine, but you say, look, it's done on Kubernetes, in a Kubernetes way, in a Kubernetes style, I think that's a really powerful abstraction. And, it's really skeletal and primitive right now, but if you sort of squint and play out the sort of App Engine-y serverless framework, pick your favorite serverless, I think there's amazing possibilities there, all the way up to including things like Lambda, right? Yeah. Where Lambda sort of right now positioned as the holy grail of, I don't need to know anything about what's happening. I just write some code and ta-da.
And run it. Yeah. So you mentioned Lambda. Well, I don't want to get into a Google Cloud or anything like that. Last question for you, Tim, and we've taken enough of your time. And so what's next for Tim?
What's next for me? I have more work to do. Kubernetes is not done in any sense. It's somewhat fractal. The closer I get to it, the more details we see and we need. So there's a ton of work to do, and there's exciting stuff to do, really sort of phase 2 stuff, right? I think we're coming to the end of what I think of as phase 1 of Kubernetes, right? Ubiquity is close. The APIs are starting to show their age. We're starting to see the cracks and the gaps, and we're looking for enhancements, better ways of describing things that are that warrant the level of complexity that we didn't want to build into the system at the beginning, right? I spend a lot of my time looking at networking, so I'm looking at all the gaps around networking and multi-cluster and those sorts of issues, and they're plenty, right? We have real customers who are doing amazing things. They need multiple clusters, they need multiple environments, they need multi-tenancy, they need bigger storage, deeper integrations. I'm really interested by these things, and I'm going to spend my next years looking at that.
I think it's a worthy goal. Very good. Tim, thanks so much. Tim Hockin of Google's engineering team, one of the original Kubernetes team members and a continuing force in the community. Thank you very much, and we hope you have a great rest of our day here at the Kubernetes Ecosystem Summit.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with the Monday news headlines. We have lots of great articles on the sites, lots of great information, so I wanted to let you know about some of the things that we have on all three of the sites, DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. First up, we have on DevOps.com, we have some information about Microsoft, who at their Ignite conference last week announced a plethora of updates that collectively further the adoption of DevOps on its cloud platform and those best practices related to it. The announcements, as I said, were made at the Ignite conference, and the majority of them actually include GitHub, which the company purchased in 2018. So one of them actually is a preview of an update to Visual Studio 19. It's 16.8 that will add support for GitHub code spaces, which is a capability that automatically creates repositories on GitHub. Also on DevOps, we have a post that looks at the role of DevSecOps in building financial services applications. The whole fintech space is gaining steam. DevOps is increasingly part of that fintech conversation. So this article really looks at the importance of including security in the DevOps equation for successful fintech application development. And just as an aside, MediaOps is hosting a virtual event that's purely focused on the fintech space. It's being held in early December, so watch this space. Stay tuned for more information on that. Also on DevOps.com, we have an interesting take on the validity of using Conway's Law in DevSecOps. Now, Conway's Law, in layman terms, if you don't know, says that the success of a software is based on an organization's structure and communication style. So this article argues that Conway's Law should only be used as a rough guideline because following it too closely can stymie innovation in fast-changing cloud environments. So, do you agree? Check out the article and decide for yourself. Okay, on Container Journal, we've got news that IT services provider Second Watch has extended the reach of its practice to include Google Anthos, which is the hybrid cloud computing platform that's based on Kubernetes. This is yet another example of the growing adoption of Kubernetes as the de facto cloud orchestration technology and its growing ubiquity as more organizations adopt containers. Oh, and hey, we've also got a virtual summit on Kubernetes and cloud native technologies coming up this week, in fact. So check the sites for more details and sign up today. Also on Container Journal is a post that offers up the 10 best practices worth implementing to adopt Kubernetes. This is a pretty exhaustive list, and chances are it addresses some of the complexities associated with Kubernetes that you might be having trouble dealing with. Over on Security Boulevard, our resident legal guru, Mark Rash, looks at the tricky topic of the high cost of reporting a non-reportable data breach. In other words, how some organizations have done their due diligence in reporting data breaches that didn't result in any actual leak of personal data, yet they still got dinged. It's a fine line for sure, but it goes back to how data rules are interpreted, so definitely worth checking out if you get the time. We also have an interesting take on open source security and who actually owns it. So is it the open source community? Is it companies? Is it both? Check out the article and decide for yourself. All right, that's all that I'm going to let you know about right now. Please check the sites for all of the news and information that we have that's updated daily, multiple times daily. So otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow with the Tuesday edition of the news headlines. Until then, please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps, and I'm here now with John Turbo Conwell, who is a Principal Data Scientist at Domain Tools. Hey John, how you doing? Or do you prefer Turbo?
Either way. Everyone at work calls me Turbo, so.
All right, great. We'll have to have another conversation later about why they call you Turbo, but for now, let's go ahead and talk about this initiative that you were recently involved in, possibly still recently involved in, I'm not quite sure, but that's around the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition. So like I said, I want to have the conversation with you about that, but so I'm hoping that maybe you can, first of all, tell me about Domain Tools. Tell me what you guys do.
Yeah, so Domain Tools, we collect and analyze data about pretty much every domain and every IP address on the internet. And this data is useful for threat intelligence, incident response, SOC analysts, who can use this to inform risk assessments, identifying related attacker infrastructure, fraud investigations. So pretty much enrich the information that they have about maybe an indicator of like, I don't think that's good, and bring more context and help them make a decision of like, I want to block that domain or that's okay.
Okay, all right. So you deal with data. You're a data guy.
Lots of data. Every domain on the internet.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me about this coalition that you are involved in.
Yeah, so the Cyber Threat Coalition, it kicked up around, so late March, it was like March 20-something. And it was literally just a Slack channel. It was, I'm sure the founders were like talking beforehand, but they kicked up the Slack channel just so that people could share threat intelligence. And to give you a little background of like what came probably the 2 weeks prior to the CTC spinning up, in early February, so we watch domains being created every single day. And so we kind of profile the domain names. And so I was looking at domains that are COVID related, like have, coronavirus, COVID-19, and all the different kind of terms in there, and how many domains were created every single day with that as a theme.
Mm-hmm.
And in early February, we had this, it was around a couple hundred a day, and then all of a sudden there's this big spike to 1,000 domains created over a couple of days, which is huge in that one theme. And then it dropped, and that was back to a couple hundred. And so we were watching the domains, and about 2 weeks before the CTC spun up, or a week and a half, there was another spike, and it jumped basically up to about 5,000 domains per day.
Wow.
And that lasted over 2 weeks. So every single day there's 5,000. And we one of our products is called Risk Score. We try to give someone a sense of how risky is this domain. Do you want to visit it? Do you want to allow it behind your firewall, or should you maybe block it? And that 5,000, most of them were had a very high risk score, and it's just kind of unprecedented. Like that's a massive amount of kind of in one theme, massive amount of domains. And while that was so, during that time, basically pretty much every company has security engineers. They're kind of going crazy. And I think they just started talking behind the scenes and kind of informal channels and said, we need to come together and, create an official organization to really focus on, the COVID-19 threat.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of threat intel sharing organizations and channels, and, very, very formalized and very like IRC. So completely informal. But people wanted to one place to focus on coronavirus because the volume of threats was just, I say unprecedented. From what I've seen before, it was unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, so this kind of grew from word of mouth. Was it kind of an organic growth that you guys, and how many folks did you actually have involved in this coalition at its heyday?
So I joined probably its third day in.
Okay.
We have a couple of security researchers at work who are in multiple different kind of Slack security channels or workspaces, as well as like IRC, many different ways to share intel. And they told us about the CTC, hey, there's this new Slack channel. It's open for everybody. Not all of them. A lot of them are invite only. And I'm a data scientist pretending to be a security researcher. So I'm like, I'll join. And so I joined, and on its, like I said, it was about its third day, and just tried to kind of figure out where I could help. And it was a bit of a chaos because it was early on. It was like 4 different channels, and people were just dropping what they call it, indicators of IOCs, indicator of compromise. Dropping IOCs everywhere. Like, this is a bad IP, or is this a bad domain, or and everyone's just trying to vet these domains, whether verify yes that's sketchy or no that's official. So
how many do you have any idea of how many people were part of the coalition?
Early on, so when I joined, it spun up pretty quick. There was like 500 or 600 people within the first week.
Wow.
And then it was a lot, and everyone's got a voice, and everyone's helping, or like I said, a lot of people are just coming in and dropping, like, I saw this bad domain, and then leaving. And so
right
now there's, I think at its peak it was around 3,500. There's a lot of people that joined and didn't participate too much. You ended up having we ended up developing over a while, like kind of organized the channels, and so there was these vetted channels, and the people that were very active were then invited into the vetted channels, and you had to kind of go through. Yes, you work for, I work for Domain Tools. I'm a data scientist. I'm trustworthy.
Okay.
And so then within that group, there was, a smaller set of a couple hundred people in the vetted channels.
Okay. All right. Great. So, what were some of the things that you guys did over the course of the last few months? I mean, beyond kind of discerning which domain names were legit and which ones were ones to avoid. I mean, were you guys doing any trend spotting or anything like that, or was it mostly just kind of helping vet those domain names?
Early on, it was there was a ton of work. So early on, it was all about finding things to block.
Okay.
And everyone's just like I said, just dropping all these indicators and vetting it. And we came out with a block list, official COVID-19 block list.
Mm-hmm.
And every name that was on there was somebody took a look at and said, yeah, that's we're not going to, that's on the block list. But then the problem was, and this was kind of another thing that I hadn't seen before, is threat actors jumped on to COVID-19 really quickly. And then legitimate organizations were about 2 weeks behind. So all of a sudden, the United Way was spinning up, they'd spin up 5 or 6 domains that are, United Way, I'm just making domain names up, but United Way COVIDresponse.com or different cities are spinning up domains. And so, but the problem was these domains looked a lot like the domains that threat actors were already creating to try to do fraud or phishing or scams. And so then a lot of the work switched from identifying things to block to identifying these are legitimate sites that we don't want to block. So then there was about a week, 2 weeks of a lot of work building what we call an allow list. And it's like, these are vetted, good, don't block them. But there was so many, like I said, legitimate organizations were kind of late to the game.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine. I mean, there were, we heard a lot about domains that were spinning up and were basically phishing sites for more than anything else. But did you guys work on? Was it kind of a worldwide initiative? I mean, or were you guys focusing on the U.S. or how did it work out that way?
I don't think there was any kind of geo focus in there.
Okay.
It was, because I'm trying to think, sorry.
No, that's all right.
It doesn't feel like there's a US focus, but the flip side is a lot of the domains, written, the domain names are written in English, and a lot of our focus was on those. So we didn't have like French translators identifying, French terms. And maybe that's something that it could be something we missed, actually. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, no, I wonder because, you hear about so many of these threats actually emanating from other countries and specifically targeting, U.S. Organizations because, I guess we're a little easier to target than maybe other countries. I'm not sure. But anyway, so what are you guys doing now? I mean, are you guys still kind of very much active, or have you kind of spun things down a little bit, or where are you in the whole?
Yeah, we spun things down. We spun things down a couple months ago. Okay. Basically, I've got this chart of COVID related domains created per day, and about 2 months ago, a long tail of eventually, I think there's just only so many different ways you can use coronavirus or COVID-19 in a domain that's actually legitimately going to trick somebody. And so now we're seeing about 150 to 200 domains a day. And so the volume of threats really decreased. And so the CTC leadership basically, they didn't kill the channel. Like, the channel's still there. And actually people are still actively talking and sharing, but the volume is a lot less. So we kind of quote spun it down. But I think the goal is, it's not so much, the CTC is not a COVID threat organization. It is, and this is kind of my view, it's kind of a crisis organization. Okay. So we're not looking at every single threat that's out there, but when the next Katrina happens or the next Dominican Republic earthquake happens, and threat actors, anytime something really bad happens, threat actors will jump on it and try to take advantage. And so the goal, I think, that is with the CTC is have this set of, this network of people ready to work on that next event and, just try to do good.
Great. So you guys are, of course, you're going to have to change the name. So, because it's.
Well, it's the Cyber Threat Coalition.
Oh, okay. All right. So
it was like the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Coalition.
Right.
Now we're just the Cyber Threat Coalition.
The Cyber Threat Coalition. Awesome. It almost sounds like a superhero. Yeah. It's like the Avengers. The Cyber Threat Coalition. Yeah. So anyway, well, that's great stuff. I really do applaud your group's, just your ability and your willingness to get in there and kind of root out the bad domains and kind of keep us safe, basically, like all superheroes do. So
I would say one of the big pieces that goes along with it is all the different organizations, the companies that just said, hey, take the next 2 weeks and, work for the CTC. My boss basically said, don't worry about your job. Just go work for the CTC for a couple weeks, do good. And,
Perfect.
There's a couple hundred companies that did that. And that was actually kind of cool too.
That is amazing. That's really great to hear. I'm really surprised actually you guys haven't received more press about it, but I'm really glad to be the one to break the news. So, but John, thank you so much for taking the time and telling me about the Cyber Threat Coalition. Great stuff you guys are doing, and I know that there's a lot of good that's being done in light of COVID-19, and your organization or your coalition is just one shining example of that. So thank you very much. Thanks for doing it, and thanks for being on TechStrong TV.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, great. Okay, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps, and I'm here now with the Monday version of the webinars previews. As always, we have great webinars coming up on all of the sites. Thought I'd let you know about some of the ones that are coming up within the next few days. Hopefully we can get you guys attending and interacting with the webinars. The first one I want to let you know about is happening tomorrow, Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's called Solving the Achilles Heel of DevOps Quality and Speed with Test Environment Management. This one is sponsored by Plutora. And it features Mark Hornbeek and Jeffrey Kais from Plutora. They're going to be talking about the challenges that are associated with improving how the pre-production environments are managed and automated, and how test management techniques can help now and in the future. Definitely one worth checking out if you are having issues with test management techniques or actually pre-production environments, test management and the way test management can help with that. Next one I want to let you know about is also happening on Tuesday. This one is also on DevOps.com. It's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's called How Expedia Improved Developer Productivity and Reduced Mean Time to Resolution by over 90%. This one is happening, as I said, Tuesday, September 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's sponsored by Overops. This one is a case study of sorts. Talks about Expedia's journey. See what I did there? Investing heavily in
providing a seamless digital platform that automates travel experiences and intelligently connects millions of travelers and suppliers with customer service agents. The customer experience is what it's all about these days. So the webinar discusses how Expedia increased visibility into its applications to reduce that MTTI and MTTR by more than 90%, and the strategies it employed using OverOps technology to improve code quality across the entire pipeline. And it also will go over how contextual runtime data from OverOps helped Expedia cut down reliance on logging and eliminate critical errors. The last webinar I want to let you know about is also happening on Tuesday. This one is happening at 3 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It's a step-by-step guide to protecting web apps with Google reCAPTCHA, sponsored by a company called Chronicle. So in this webinar, you'll get a deep dive into how easy and effective it is to leverage reCAPTCHA Enterprise, including how to reduce login attempts by approximately 90% without reducing user engagement, and using reCAPTCHA Enterprise to protect websites from some of OWASP's most challenging web automated attacks. This is good stuff, especially if you've been having issues with your website getting attacked, which everybody is, so definitely one worth checking out. All right, guys, check back tomorrow for another batch of fresh webinars on tap. And until then, have a great day and please stay safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Excellent job there with the news and webinar previews, as well as a good interview with John Cornwall. Now it's time for the Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell, take it away.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with the Accelerated Strategies Group. We've got a new report coming out, some new research that I wanted to share with you. We actually have several projects coming in the pipeline, but the most recent one or current one is around cloud and mainframe strategies. Now, I want to back up for a moment, and since this is commentary, I want to share with you just a little bit of perspective. I started out my career doing kind of dual kind of work. PCs are relatively new. I'd started a little personal business writing software for my father's medical office and trying to sell that to his friends, and kind of got down this PC path. At the same time, I was doing mainframe applications. That was what they were teaching in school. Both, but primarily mainframe applications, IBM, those environments. And I went into banking and et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to know my whole career. But the point is I started in this mainframe environment, really concentrated on that pretty heavily for about 5-7 years or so, first part of my career. But the latter part of that, I really started moving into client server and kind of keeping up in database and data modeling and system architecture and all kinds of great things. And GUIs, UIs, Macs came out and all that kind of stuff. So it was, I've had this sort of dual experience until at one point I stopped doing mainframe applications. And that happened pretty much, I was building, interface layers to mainframe apps in the early 90s. And after that, I hadn't done a lot with mainframes. I kind of thought that was in my past. I said, that's legacy stuff. I'm working on client server. I'm working on cloud applications. I'm doing network security, all this really interesting stuff. But things have evolved. They moved on. Well, interestingly enough, now that I'm in this analyst role, the whole mainframe world has come rushing back into my world. And I'm using terms and reflecting back on things I knew from way back when and talking about IMS databases and DB2 and CICS and JCL and you name it. There's new things, but there's a lot of all the things I worked on are still there in some form or another. And I pity the folks that have to maintain any code that I wrote way back then. But the point being of all this is, who knew that would be a big part of what I'm working on these days? And I think it's representative of how important mainframes are to our environment. Now, if I said that to your typical startup, they would say, what are you talking about? Mainframes, that's like old stuff. But then again, I just have a briefing with another company who is looking at some kind of code analysis type tools around mainframe technologies, as well as client server and I guess more modernly thinking of cloud native applications. But it is part of our environment. And I think we just like to focus so much on the shiny new stuff that it's really easy to say, oh yeah, that's back there and don't need to worry about it. Well, guess what? Mainframes are super important. When you think about, the share community puts on a conference every year and they have some really great stats, like 30 billion transactions a day are processed on mainframe environments. 80% of the world's business data is warehoused or located on mainframe environments. 90% of all credit card transactions. Maybe that's getting whittled away over time. Maybe that's accelerating too as more and more transactions happen. And then I know from my own experience, you love to think about the next generation of technology or refreshing something up to the current generation or technology or standardizing on certain technologies so you simplify your environment. Rarely does that make sense to do. And I don't mean this cynically, but replacing apps, especially apps you've built, is extremely hard. First, it's hard to justify, hard to cost justify, because what are we going to get? Usually there's soft benefits to that. The architecture is better. It can be more distributed. We can take advantage of cloud. We can do whatever. Okay, you have to turn those into real financial numbers. So how are we going to if we're going to spend that kind of money, either replacing it with a third-party app or rebuilding something critical to our business, it's pretty hard to justify. And to be honest with you, many of those projects fail. That's what I've seen happen. They are not easy to make happen. I mean, if you've ever been on a billing project to rewrite a billing system, that's fraught with danger. At least it has in my experience. So kind of back to this theme about mainframes is they are a huge critical part of our IT environment, of our data fabric, of our business processing environment. And yes, we're doing microservices and cloud native and containers and Kubernetes container management systems, all kinds of great things with new apps. But we also have a world that isn't of that architecture. And there's a common misunderstanding, I think, around DevOps and Agile of the certain technology stacks are just so inflexible or they're so old or whatever kind of reason gets made up, that they don't really apply to that. Well, that flies in the face, to me anyway, of what are the key principles around methodologies or approaches like DevOps and Agile. They're non-technology specific. They are not about requiring a certain technology. Some things may be easier to do. Some things may be more challenging. But not the whole thing, not the whole adoption of DevOps or Agile. So this is what in part kicked off some research that we did. And it's built upon a number of things. Some an experience base working in mainframes and kind of catching up what's happening in mainframes and keeping up on that. But it's also understanding the environment that we're in right now. Mainframes are getting attention. I think we all saw a number of months ago these urgent call for COBOL programmers by states for the unemployment systems to be able to issue checks because they didn't have the resources to implement the economic recovery bills that were adopted by the federal government for unemployment and adding to that to help people sustain during the current economic times that we're in. So that kind of put a little bit of a spotlight, but I think even more so now, it's part of this fabric of applications and underlying technologies that businesses not only have to manage and keep running, but as they're going to accelerate through an economic downturn into recovery, maybe adopt some very different kinds of strategies, business and technology, but also be able to be nimble and react to what's happening in the marketplace and the unevenness of economic recoveries across the globe. There are so many different factors that say flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. Give me something, some way that I can do quickly make a difference immediately, experiment, fail fast when I need to understand that I've failed and I need to make a course correction, but don't overinvest in it. You can't do that if you're going to leave half of your infrastructure or some significant portion of your business behind and say, we're just going to write that off as it's old stuff, so it doesn't use modern techniques, and we'll just do that on the new things. So we've issued this report. It's coming out this week. It's actually commissioned by a company called ASG Technologies, unaffiliated with Accelerated Strategies Group. And I'll talk more about this in specifics as part of the launch of that. But it's really examining, that's part of the legacy imperative of we have to have mainframes as part of our strategy. And we are doing ourselves a disservice by not adopting DevOps and Agile approaches to those environments. And if you have, congratulations, fantastic. I think you're on the right path. Yeah. And so I lay out in this research, in this report, some recommendations around 5 critical strategies for cloud and mainframe. And it's really built around the idea of you don't adopt things, whether it's a new technology and be able to financially justify the business benefits you're going to get, or adopt an approach, a method. Why are we going to do DevOps, or why are we going to do Agile? What's really driving that, besides somebody who had an inspiration to say we should do this? It's the current thing. It's important. It's useful. Blah blah blah. But why? I think the organization needs a why behind why we're doing this. Otherwise, it becomes, I remember one point in my career, I worked for a large company where everything was a program. And every 6 months, a new program would come out. And we all knew that in 6 months, this too shall pass. And the next thing will be, and will come, and we'll be on the next thing. And I think those cycles happens in organizations, not just large. But that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to treat DevOps or Agile as fads. We want to understand why we're doing this. Like if we're doing DevOps, is it really to do 10 deploys into production an hour? Maybe that makes no sense for our business. We wouldn't do that. Or we wouldn't be able to consume that, or the customers wouldn't. Maybe there are other real drivers around why we might want to do DevOps or Agile. We can talk about what those are, but I think the organization has to adopt its own why. And that can help drive then subsequent strategies around the cultural shift that happens around DevOps. And cultures don't change easily. And DevOps does require some fundamental things about how people work together. Doesn't mean you're going to turn your culture 180 degrees and make it something it's not, but you got to build off of what the strengths and the characteristics of your culture are. Help you with an adoption plan, really laying out what parts of this are we going to adopt? How far are we going to take it? Is it going to include part of a modernization effort of taking some mainframe applications and starting to implement some flexibility into .NET applications to microservices or whatever it might be? Why would we want to do that? And then let's really understand how we start to do that. Because you just don't want to turn something loose to the whole organization and say, okay, the flag now is called DevOps. Ready, set, go. We all run. Guess what? You'll have a whole bunch of failures, and even the successes will be overshadowed by those few, by the overwhelming failures. Or you'll get just such a sub-optimized approach. You're not going to get a lot of the benefits of it, or it will be very localized to individual teams. So in this report, I talk about some of the strategies around adoption and measurement. They say, you measure what matters. What matters is what you measure, which I think is very true. I mean, if you're going to spend the time to measure it, you're doing it because you're going to look at those numbers and you're going to do something about it. And if you're in any kind of a data-driven organization or want to be, that's what's going to drive a lot of things. What's investments, decisions, strategies, shifts that you may be making, analysis for all kinds of options that can potentially help your business. And last but not least, that I built into this is some of the concepts around continuous improvement. I was fortunate to have training in total quality management, fit discipline learning organization. Peter Senge from think it was, I can't remember which university it was from now. It's been a while ago. But the things around really building in some of the concepts that later showed up in DevOps, coming out of the manufacturing world. Those same things, of course, with Deming, came out of Toyota and other manufacturing environments. Six Sigma, many people don't know that if you're steeped in that, you probably know this, but that's another term for manufacturing. Sigma is each sigma is how many standard deviations away from the measurement, that's the norm that we are going to allow, going to consider, good quality. And that's what you strive for is, really you're refining it that far down so that you're really controlling or managing quality. So a lot of these things are steeped in the manufacturing environment. And it's been so helpful to all of us who aren't in manufacturing. And this idea of continuous improvement is really got to be built into the fabric of how you're adopting new approaches like DevOps and how you're applying that to mainframe environments, how you're applying it to cloud, your new cloud native applications, all of it. And those are things that can be shared and learned from across the organization. If you go back and read Peter Senge, he's really talking about how it isn't just about continuous improvement and making it a local phenomena to a team of 6 or 10 or 100 people. It's really, how do you share that knowledge? And I don't want to say institutionalize. That sounds like either getting locked up and never shared, but you want to make that learning part of the fabric of the organization. So if there have been some really great discoveries by a team or some fail-fast strategies that we had to adopt and live by because of some really challenging conditions, whatever those learnings are, that's part of being this learning organization. So it takes the same kind of culture you need for a DevOps team. It takes sharing. It takes collaboration. It takes executing, but also applying some reflection upon what you've been doing and looking for areas to improve, but also assessing how you've done and where things could have gone better. So there's all kinds of great resources around continuous improvement. So to kind of wrap this up, I think that if you really have to respond to a challenging situation, and I don't know of a more challenging situation than our current economic conditions. I know some people are doing real well. Many folks, having to adapt and apply multiple strategies, or at least scenario planning, and then adapt to the situation at hand, as well as make strategic investments at the same time. Investing in DevOps across the organization, inclusive of mainframe applications, cloud native applications, could be other parts of, we talk about agile business practices. Maybe there's a DevOps business practices. I think there is. It's kind of influencing us that way too. So I look forward to sharing that with you more. And actually, we're scheduling today, following this Analyst Corner, we're going to show another video segment that I did with the folks at ASG Technologies, who sponsored this research, who share some really good insights, because they're dealing with customers across both the cloud and mainframe perspective, and have some really good insights. And they're good folks, with Jeff Charrington and Anna Murray, who are really great guests. So I look forward to sharing that interview with you in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining.
Control to Major Tom. Turn up your CI/CD pipe and put your observability on. Ground control to Major Tom. 10, 9. Commencing countdown, engines on. 6, 5. Check ignition. God's love be with you.
This is Major Major Tom to ground control. DevOps Command is here to stay. I have a great way for you to engage today. DevOps looks very different, but not to worry. We have KK to show you the way, and Batya Galoop has something to say. And more. DevOps Experience 3 is coming your way October 22nd. And as it has been since the first, it's virtual. We know everything's virtual today, but this one is designed virtual from the start, and it's free as it should be. We have great speakers beyond KK and Batya Galoop, along with lots of learning and interactive chat, expo halls. We're going to be covering CI, CD, observability, GitOps, SRE, tools, the humans of DevOps, and some surprises too. Sign up today at DevOpsExperience.com. DevOps Experience is going to go where no DevOps conference has ever gone before, and the force will be with you. So can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? See you at DevOps Experience October 22nd, DevOpsExperience.com.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I'm joined today by Colton Andrus, CEO with Gremlin. Welcome. Good to see you, Colton.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. You know, chaos engineering, interesting things happening in this world. You know, chaos engineering happens in testing, it happens in reliability of systems. And of course, you know, that's more your focus. Tell us a little bit about Gremlin. So folks that don't know Gremlin, a little bit about what you guys do and some of your products.
Yeah, so the quick backstory there, I was an SRE at Amazon. I was in charge of making sure the retail website and the Amazon services stayed up. We found chaos engineering to be an effective way to help us accomplish that goal, helped us save time and better understand our systems. After my time at Amazon, I went and joined Netflix. This was right after Chaos Monkey. And obviously they had a culture that embraced reliability and a willingness to take new steps and pioneer a new practice. It was great to be there and to be able to build upon that, to help them have continued success. After my time at Netflix, decided that this is something that everybody was going to need. As everyone moves to the cloud, as everyone builds distributed systems, as everyone relies on someone else's software working correctly, it becomes increasingly important that we understand the edges and how things behave when things go wrong. And so we founded Gremlin to go take this process and this practice and really democratize it. Build the tools that everyone would need that would work in all of the environments, Windows, Linux, Kubernetes, etc. Make it safe, make it easy to use, and be able to provide some of the expertise and guidance we'd learned in building distributed systems over the last decade and help our customers build more reliable systems. So at its heart, Gremlin is a chaos engineering platform that allows you to fill up disks, consume CPU, drop packets, replicate a dependency failing or going dark or a grave failure, testing things like region evacuation, tuning alerts and your alerts and engagement, and being able to train teams, being able to give people an opportunity to practice during the day. So the first time that they're dealing with a problem isn't 2 in the morning as they're wiping the cold out of their eyes.
Yeah, that's the time you don't want to find those things out, right? You know, it's very interesting. Of course, the Chaos Monkey story is pretty famed. I think one of the things that I'd love to get your take on the adoption. Now, obviously, I think what you've done, you just said democratize. It's really about making it more accessible to people than how do I go about doing this and learning how to do it from scratch. What does it take for an organization to say, we are going to do chaos engineering? We're going to adopt a platform like Gremlin. This is something we'll take on. I can imagine that first conversation with your manager and operations. They'll be like, okay, put the job description on the sites because we're going to have an opening.
It can go both ways. You certainly have the people in the trenches that feel the pain, that understand perfectly why they would want to do this and why it's a good idea. But often it's a leadership and a culture problem. Does their leadership involve why this is really about de-risking what can happen and about improving reliability, not willy-nilly causing chaos? So there's definitely some education that needs to happen there. How seriously a company takes it is also a big indicator of the success they'll have. I've seen a few companies and they're like, cool, we have our intern. They're going to figure this out for us.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is a strategy. An intern can take an open source project and bring it in-house and set it up. But are they convincing engineers to engineer their software differently? Are they participating in the postmortems and retrospectives to really learn what types of failure that companies have and how to improve them? And so what I've seen be most successful is when there's that alignment at the top and at the bottom. The leadership cares about building reliable software. They know that when it fails, their customers feel that pain and they lose money. The engineers understand that it saves them time, and by investing in it up front, they're not going to get woken up at 2 a.m. and they're going to feel more comfortable and confident in their software. And the company prioritizes that effort, that it's something that, people are allowed to spend time on, that there's time set aside on the product board or in the Jira so that people are investing in it and they're measuring it. They're seeing the results, they're seeing the baseline and the improvement. That's when we see it be most effective.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, is it more often someone who is experiencing a lot of problems that might bring in some like your product, or is it someone who says, we really need to get ahead of this and make sure that we can deliver reliably?
The irony is, I think Gremlin is best suited for the companies that are fighting fires, that are feeling that pain, that they're playing whack-a-mole and they really want to get on top of it and in front of it so it's not a distraction and allows them to focus on their customers. But that's often the excuse I hear for why they're not ready to invest in it. The two answers I hear that as a practitioner frustrate me are, well, we have enough chaos already. We don't need to create chaos.
We're too busy. We got enough chaos.
And the answer there is no. We're here about removing chaos. Like, we can help you solve that so you have the time and effort to do those things. And so the companies that really, they've been through it, they've dealt with the ups and downs and the whack-a-mole, but they really care about their overall platform. The companies that impress me most are the ones that understand that whether it's in COVID, whether it's in just the world of operating in the cloud and innovating quickly, that reliability and quality are going to be key differentiators for their company over the next 10 years. And here's a little secret. Amazon viewed it as a competitive advantage 10 years ago when we built it, that 100% not failing and providing higher quality was going to help them win in the e-commerce space.
Of course, extremely insightful, but when you're so much of your business, your whole business is reliant on an online presence, people only tolerate a couple of failures, then they're going to move on and see you as just unreliable or flaky. You mentioned COVID. Think about the rush, the increase of capacity and number of people using services, literally overnight. And now everybody's a remote worker. Not everybody, but virtually so. I'm sure there were some war stories we didn't hear about that customers experience. You may have heard about. What are some of the challenges that you saw customers or prospective customers experience?
Yeah, it's been interesting. On one hand, many of our customers that have online portals and provide online services have just seen a vast increase in their traffic. In the e-commerce world, it's akin to Black Friday level traffics on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And those are events that we prepare all year for. And so, for my customers that are in that spot, it's been a good story because they invested and prepared in this a year or two ago. They were able to handle that ramp up smoothly and weather the storm. There's been a few public examples of companies that have not during COVID, and I don't need to pick on them, but I'm interested to hear the war stories afterwards and when people are comfortable to share them as well. Not to make fun of those people, because those are hard problems and we're all dealing with complex environments, many moving pieces and unforeseen circumstances. Really, I'm excited to hear what they've learned. I'm an outage junkie. I love to read every retrospective or postmortem. When I joined Amazon, the first thing I did was read every outage that they had documented. And that's really helpful to me, both in terms of pattern matching and seeing the types of things that go wrong. But there's a human element. There's always a story. What happened? How did it play out? You know, who was able to swoop in and save the day, or what was the resolution at the end? It's that kind of distributed systems murder mystery.
It is a bit of untangling, right, to figure out what happened and what they had to do to solve it. And then like you said, what do you learn from it? What can you improve to help the next time? You know, we were talking about adoption earlier of chaos engineering. It's almost a decision of, do you think software should be perfect and you try to get it as perfect as possible? Or do you believe software will always fail no matter how perfect you try? And that's really, to me, that's really the world that we live in. It is, software is going to fail. Period. It will happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the kind of black and white view on that argument, because on one hand, a lot of people don't recognize that software will fail. And sometimes that comes from not being in the technical details or being a little bit removed. And people are surprised that, what do you mean that data center went down? What do you mean that router failed? Didn't we have a redundant? What do you mean this other thing went wrong? And the truth is, things fail all day, every day. And how you handle the failure is key. But are we trying to build perfect systems? I think that's aspirational, right? There's a reason we measure it in nines, we're not going for 100%, because if you're in the trenches, you know that's not realistic. And so how many nines are good enough? And I think that's the question. I see a lot of people in the 3 nines world. And when you're down for, 8 to 10 hours a year, you're basically down for an hour every month. I think that's unacceptable. I think that's a bar that we can do better than. But, when we got 4 nines, we were in a good spot. It was more, how do we maintain this and make sure we don't regress, as opposed to, are we going to get that much value going from 40 minutes to 5 minutes of outage?
Mm-hmm. Speaking of outage and the COVID situation, are you seeing people elevating their importance and investment level of kind of de-risking and resilience and uptime? Is that a greater priority in organizations? Or are we not quite hit enough of a problem that it's still sort of, at the same levels that are pre-COVID?
I think it's brought it up to be top of mind because people recognize that their customer base has shifted. The profile of their customers has changed. But I think there's still a long way to go in terms of treating it as a first-class citizen and making sure it's getting the appropriate investment. Mm-hmm. It breaks my heart some days to just see that's technical debt. We'll get to it when it get to it. And if you're ever on the other end of that technical debt, it doesn't feel like technical debt. It feels like the product or the service that you're using just doesn't do what you want it to. Mm-hmm. And to me, they're one and the same, but I think we've got a little ways to go until everyone recognizes that.
Technical debt to me is always that thing that the developers shake their head when you say, no, we're not going to do that, right? And they're like, you don't know how big of this problem is that's building up.
Well, and that's, one of the reasons I enjoy chaos engineering is there's a lot of mental models. There's a lot of, hey, here's what we think would happen. And the truth is that that's not necessarily reality. And going in and actually measuring the risk lets you understand whether or not you're comfortable with it. And the answer is sometimes you are. Sometimes you look at it and you're like, if that fails, we can tolerate that. Or it gracefully degrades, it's not that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. But the flip side is the things that you're unaware of that were, it's the black swan events that could bring your entire system down for several hours or a day. And you're not aware of those and you're coming along feeling like everything's good. The analogy I draw, which might not be a fan for those, I don't actually love spiders, but the analogy I draw is, you're shining a light into a dark place and the spiders go running, and people are uncomfortable when they see the spiders go running out. But the truth is those spiders were already there. Do you want to be aware of them or not? Is ignorance bliss, or do you want to make, data-driven decisions based on reality?
Is ignorance bliss, or is it just ignorance? I think it's just ignorance. Well, let's talk about Chaos Comp coming up in October. I think it's the 3rd through the 6th. This will be a virtual conference, correct?
Yep. Don't feel like now's the time to pull everyone into a room. Don't feel like we're
It's actually 6th through the 8th. I think I got the dates wrong. 6th through the 8th, is that right?
Yeah, 6th through the 8th.
Okay. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what iteration, what edition is this? How many years has you been doing Chaos Conf?
Yeah, this is our third year. So first time, a couple of years back in person in San Francisco, kind of a modest group. It was a couple hundred people. It was a really great group, but you could tell it was early days. Last year, we had to get a bigger ballroom. We had to get more folks in the room. We had 500, 600, 700 in the door and several hundred more that had registered. And a lot of good engagement from the recordings that we did and the content that we had. This year, we're going to have 3 times that plus. We had the opportunity to do Failover Conf in the spring, which was really a great learning experience for what does a good digital conference look like. And we took some of that and we were able to adapt it because we want it to be a good use of time. We want people to get some of that conference love, that ability to network and chat with folks and feel like you're in the room. But we also know that people are busy and there's a million Zoom meetings and, we don't really want people to just, log in and tune out and go about their day. And so that's required us to be a little bit more creative, both in terms of content and structure.
I know you structured it around 3 half days actually. So, right, people can fit in their regular work as well as listen in, participate in the conference.
Yeah, that was, actually one thing we debated was, do we do this, split across the day? Do we do a morning, afternoon, and evening across 3 days so we can accommodate folks in EU, folks on the East Coast, West Coast, folks in Asia? And ultimately, we decided that the 3 afternoons got us, you don't have to lose a full day. So if you've got work, if you're on the East Coast or in Europe, you can watch in the evening. If you're on the West Coast, you can get your important stuff done in the morning and then you can conference in the afternoon. But breaking it up over a couple of days also felt like less of a commitment from people that were attending. Hey, two full days and when you're in person and you're traveling is great. When you're at home and you got to take a break to chase the kids down or let the dog out isn't as smooth. So the 3 days was meant to help offset that.
Hey, you've got some pretty great speakers coming up, I think, correct?
I'm pretty excited. Yeah, we've got Gene Kim. I'm a big fan of the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. And
that's what got me started in DevOps was his book.
It's such a great one. My team's probably sick of hearing me quote it because there's plenty of good examples in there that are why we're in business. And then we have an opportunity to hear from Adrian Cockcroft. He joined us in the first year, and so it's going to be good for him to give his perspective of how things have evolved and changed over the last couple of years. And then we have Rachel from PagerDuty, and obviously PagerDuty is very much in our vein, doing very similar things, focused on solving similar issues. So I'm sure she's going to bring some useful content and insight for us.
Mm-hmm. Is there a theme for this year's conference beyond chaos engineering?
Yeah, the theme this year is prepare for the moments that matter. And it's really, it's funny or not funny in a way because it harkens back to the COVID conversation.
We're kind of living.
You asked anyone last fall if they were planning for a drastic shift in their online traffic and whether or not their infrastructure was ready, they probably would have said, hey, I don't think that's going to happen. And here we are, and those that, invested and prepared have weathered it better. Those that have not have just felt more pain and more of that learning. And so that's really, how do we help people take real world examples and experience from practitioners that have been living this, that have been implementing at their companies, and show why that preparation really saves them time and money and makes them much happier people and teams.
It's interesting. You hear us use in society terms like black swan and perfect storm, and somebody termed a 100-year flood. Well, why does a 100-year flood happen every 10 years? Things like that. It isn't really those rare of events. I mean, there are things that happen. They're much more frequent than we realize. We just hope that they're infrequent. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say perfect storm? It's like every other day on television.
Well, every time hurricane season comes up.
Yes, exactly. It always is, category, whatever. Well, really interesting. Well, I hope folks will go sign up for the conference. What's the site for the conference?
chaosconf.io, and it's free. And in fact, because we've got great sponsors, it's free and you get some conference swag. So it's a 2-for-1. And
Wow.
again, we hope it's really useful and engaging content so that it's worth people investing their time and coming and spending time with us.
Good. Well, hope you have a fantastic conference, and we'll do our part to help. I know you're partnering with DevOps.com and working with the team here, and we're happy to help promote that and help increase the attention, amplify that for you and with you. So great conference. Looking forward to it.
I appreciate that, Mitch.
You bet. Well, Colton, it's been a lot of fun talking with you. Really enjoyed it. It's great to hear. What your experiences are in market as you're working with customers and the evolution and growth of chaos engineering. So wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
Thanks, Mitch. Great stuff right there. Speaking of great stuff, let's head over to Channel Roundup with Mike Vizard, who has a great interview for us this week.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Johnny Zhang, who is the president of Persistent. We're going to be talking about open source, Red Hat, centers of excellence, and hopefully new container technologies, Kubernetes, and all those things that are going on at the same time. Johnny, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike.
So you guys started this campaign around a center of excellence. Is that something you think customers should be doing or you're doing on their behalf? And maybe explain a little bit about what Persistent does.
Yeah, absolutely. So Persistent Systems is a global digital solutions company. We're about 30 years old, and we've been around the block and been working with some really critical customers for a very long time. So I myself look after our alliance business, and we call that alliance because of the alliance with our customers. We have an over 17-year history with companies like IBM, where we have effectively been their partners in the development space, helping them build applications and helping them scale. So with that in mind, we're relationship with IBM and our relationship with other customers as well is this whole mission toward containerization. And the importance of that is obviously people want better scale, people want better speed, and they're looking for critical skills, people who are full stack developers who understand the cloud landscape, understand container technology, and to help them put that together. And it's a very flexible and I would say growth-driven model, right? And so when we thought of that and we thought about our own skills and our ability to support them in that containerization and digital transformation journey, we assembled sort of the cream of the crop on our side, who are those full stack developers who knows those technologies well, and we created a center of excellence. And the whole idea here is to create the center so that you can co-leverage these skills in one central spot, right? Instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to grab one developer there, or I'm going to use another developer here, we're effectively creating a center. They can share their best practices, they can share their learnings, and that kind of talent and capability is then able to be leveraged by our clients.
Do you think that shift is accelerating in the downturn brought on by the pandemic, or people pulling in their horns a little bit on new technologies and making that transition? Is it, do I put my foot on the brake or do I put my foot on the gas? Which is it?
Yeah, actually, we've seen an acceleration. So it's extremely interesting, the momentum. We were actually bracing for an impact, right? As a lot of these projects had been started over the last couple of years on this transformation journey. And we thought, oh no, with COVID hitting, everybody's tightening the purse strings and, maybe are these new technology ventures going to stop? And I think it's actually happened exactly the opposite. So we've seen our clients put the gas pedal on, in fact, because this pandemic has actually called to action the fact that containerization technology, because of the cloud capabilities behind it, is absolutely critical. And they need to move these applications better and faster and have a way to operate and maintain these applications in a much more efficient remote manner than they have been previously. If you think about it, a lot of the companies that are undergoing this type of transformation and that specifically need this type of technology are ones that have been heavily on-prem before, right? So the on-premise software that they're dealing with, that they're maintaining, they set up an IT team to go and manage, and all of that is now put into question as soon as COVID hit, because people can't be there. What if the system breaks down? And, not everybody was able to move toward remote model as quickly as everyone wanted to. And so it's actually put a lot of accelerant on the fact that we need to embrace these technologies. We need to move toward containerization for manageability beyond anything else. And while you're modernizing your current applications to take advantage of this, this technology, why not build new applications that then can leverage that full stack?
What is your sense of the skills that people have to do that? I mean, when I talk to folks, they're sometimes intimidated by Kubernetes and maybe even OpenShift on top of that as a large platform. So when you're kind of coaching people through this, how do you tell them to get started? Because I think it's kind of daunting sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's actually a constant question that we have with a lot of our customers. I think for the past couple of years, people have been really excited about the technology. They've wanted to try it. There's been multiple POCs that have launched, right? And that's good in a way, because it allows them to test the waters. It allows them to feel what kind of talent, what kind of technologies they need in order to do it. But the drawback of that obviously is fundamentally, if a POC is very contained, it's a petri dish, right, in terms of an experimentation. And when they start to see the benefits of containerized application and the development speed that this type of technology will offer, the next idea is, well, I want to scale that. I want to get that to production, because that's where I'm actually going to get my savings or my growth and all that. And POCs don't naturally incline that way, because, again, it's sheltered. It's a petri dish. It was done in a way so that it can contain all the parameters. So within our Center of Excellence, what we've done is actually we've created a framework in order to accelerate this momentum and movement toward containerization and OpenShift technologies. What we have is something called a persistent digital greenhouse. What that means is, as you can see here, it's a fundamentally like an incubation area, right? Where you're going to take in your parameters, your requirements from a business standpoint, the type of applications you want to build, the type of applications you want to modernize. We go through a design thinking sort of a session to understand the magnitude and scope of this type of engagement, this type of modernization. But what's more important is to understand how to take it from a POC to production, because ultimately you're not just experimenting for fun. You're actually building it so that you can get to that end level of business outcome. And so through that approach, we can be very specific on the technologies that you're trying to modernize, the stack that you're looking for, and then have a very programmatic way of planning out a roadmap to get there. So to your question on, what are the skills or what are the technologies that people look for? It's very custom, right? Every company kind of has the way that they've done things. And most of these applications from how they've started, have always been, I would say, there's a spaghetti behind it, right? So they've adopted various type of applications and technologies along the way, and to be able to untangle that and refactor that into a way that leverages new technology and for better maintainability is going to be a unique case per customer. But the benefit of that is, now that you're looking at it fresh and you are able to, leverage the key technologies, we think for example, the Red Hat capabilities on top of Kubernetes and the capabilities that the OpenShift platform provides really allows our clients to take an accelerated approach, if you will, of moving that forward. And so, the whole point of the Center of Excellence, the whole point of, a digital greenhouse approach is to centralize those skills, to have those skills and have those technologies available. And then we go through a very custom exercise with our clients on how to take their products to this more modern containerized version.
Do you think organizations really want to run Kubernetes? I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little resume padding from time to time, but it almost seems to me that they'd rather focus on writing code. So are they coming to you and say, hey, can you give us a managed service, or can you work with somebody like AWS or Microsoft to go run this for us? And because, we just don't have the time or the effort, and it's not the main goal.
Absolutely. And that's absolutely true. So, the whole point of this technology is not for them to be fully skilled up on OpenShift, right? Like you said, they want to go focus on their main applications. Those are the things that are going to drive them outcomes and drive them revenue, which is their core competency, right? OpenShift technology, containerization is really just a foundation to make things easier. And that's why I think Persistent is specifically able to help, because we are able to marry sort of our understanding of our clients and products. As I said, a lot of this is legacy, and we have some unique skills in understanding their legacy software, and also skills in microservices and new application building, and combine that with our base cloud infrastructure capabilities. We have experts on AWS, on Azure, on GCP, on IBM Cloud, and you need somebody that can sort of see that gamut of capabilities and gamut of the multi-cloud ecosystem and help you identify what is the best choice, almost in a managed service style, but also in terms of, technology foundation, and marry that with our clients' end goals on what type of application they should build and they should deliver. So, I think it's a choice that we help our clients make, where they can go focus on their core competencies. We offer the guidance on what type of platform to choose and how to structure that type of infrastructure and platform, utilizing our unique skills in Red Hat technologies.
When I go back, or think back at least, to maybe the last big downturn, that's when you started hearing the phrase open source first a lot. And so are we going to see a lot more of that shift to open source in the downturn? Do you think that in some ways downturns are a little more counter-cyclical for open source in terms of they accelerate adoption rather than retard it?
Yeah. Well, I think today we are a lot more mature in open source than we were before, right? I think previously the concept of open source is always very exciting. Everybody's sharing knowledge, everybody building code, pieces and components that you can easily stick together and build an application with accelerated speed. I don't think that mentality has changed. And I think that drive and that the benefit and I would say the entire perception of open source and the value that it provides is still apparent and would continue to be accelerated with a downturn, because people are looking to see how we can build faster, build different things with what's out there. I think that, open source technology and microservices really are, like I said, a little bit more mature, a little bit better packaged and more usable from an enterprise perspective with this new containerization and the foundations that we have today. So there's a certain level of, security that gets checked. There's a certain level of integrity of code that gets checked. And so you're not just borrowing open source, from wherever and whatever, and hoping that things will stitch together and work. But leveraging open source capabilities that sit on containers allows you to have at least that basic foundation of integrity for the source of the code that you're using.
Do you think that microservices are fundamentally a better way to build software, or is it just one of several? And a lot of people will use monolithic still and then use microservices alongside that, and maybe we'll have this kind of mixed hybrid scenario for a long time to come, or is there a line in the sand being drawn here?
Well, more and more, I think that line in the sand is becoming quite apparent. From the clients that we work with, the monolithic applications, they're just not supportable. They're too heavy to maintain. There's too much history. There's things that people have written and now they're gone and now you can't fix them. And, it just carries with it a lot of baggage. And so I think the reality is a lot of enterprise customers are going to continue to have those monolithic applications, but they all have a direction, a roadmap where they're moving off of them. We're starting to see more bits and pieces of new applications that have been built with microservices, because that's the only way to scale. I mean, it's very hard to continue to break down the monolithic piece, to take that monolithic piece as a whole, right? You have to start to break it down. You have to start to leverage the new technology. I mentioned that, we have a very long history with ISVs, and, for a lot of these big software vendors where they have had these solutions out there for decades, right? And even then, they have to look at a modernization strategy. They have to look at, well, how do I make this a lot more manageable, maintainable? How do I convert my monolithic application into a SaaS solution so that my new customers and even my old customers will want to buy in a new model? So I think the market and the enterprises are pushing everyone to move toward this new model. And like I said, that line is being drawn. So it's becoming a lot clearer. So we're still going to operate in a hybrid mode, but at the same time, all future investments, if you will be toward the new model.
Do you think that IT may be getting too complex, though, as a result? We have maybe promised people that things would get simpler, and yet when I look around, I see microservices, containers, Kubernetes, serverless computing frameworks. None of this stuff appears easy. So how do we kind of balance simplicity and resiliency and the tension of the complexity that creates?
Yeah, great question. And I think that comes back to, our motivation for creating a center of excellence. At the end of the day, we want our clients to be able to focus on what they do well and their core competencies. So they should be concerned about, having the right requirements for the application, the business application that they're trying to build, right? And not worry about whether you're leveraging microservices or OpenShift or Kubernetes or utilizing, Azure versus AWS, right? Those should be easy questions for them. But fundamentally, they need a set of experts and partners that's on their side to say, what I'm trying to build is this type of business application. These are my end customers, and this is what I'm trying to get to. So they set the requirements, and then you have, folks like us that can really help you and say, well, if for this type of application with that type of price point and that type of business model, you're looking at, OpenShift with AWS in this type of manner using those microservices. And that's what we want to get our clients to, so they can spend less time worrying about the cloud infrastructure and spend more time, figuring out their end business application. So in that complexity, we're trying to help reduce that complexity.
When you guys show up and kind of start talking to people early in the project, I'm sure there's a lot of choices that people have besides Red Hat OpenShift. So what do you tell them as to the reason to go with OpenShift versus any one of these other platforms that are really abstractions on top of an abstraction, with the lowest level of Kubernetes being an abstraction? So now my abstractions have abstractions, and that's okay, but why the Red Hat OpenShift abstraction?
Yeah, well, I think, like I said, we're always going to be client first. So Persistent is, well known for client satisfaction. We're ISG's winner of Star of Excellence for customer voices and voice of customer and client satisfaction. So, after polling over 100 of our clients, they have come back and said, what we can trust Persistent to do is be on our side and select and help us decide in the technology roadmap that makes most sense. So we're not going to force, you on Red Hat OpenShift. It doesn't make sense. So that's one, because everybody's technology and everybody's stack is a little bit different. Maybe it doesn't make sense for them in some way or another. So that's the first thing, is we're always going to do our design thinking workshop. We're always going to draw the requirements with our customers based off of their unique structure where it makes sense. Now, for a lot of our enterprise customers, Red Hat OpenShift does make sense because it does have a very it has a standard approach of doing things. It has the automation tools that you need. It has, basic security capabilities. So it does add a ton of benefit to if you were to undergo a modernization effort, and you're looking to do a containerization, Red Hat OpenShift gives you a set of capabilities out of the box that you can leverage right away. So don't add more complexity to it. But like I said, it is very much built from the customer up in terms of what they're trying to do. The other thing we observe often with enterprise customers is they have legacy software, right? And those legacy software come from large ISV vendors, such as IBM, where we have a lot of history with IBM and a lot of knowledge in terms of the legacy stack. And with recent IBM push in Red Hat technologies, it might make sense for that company to utilize that footprint and grow along with it. But it is very much, again, focused on the customer's end outcome.
All right, great. So what's your best advice to people other than coming to visit your website? When they get started, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think just to keep an open mind about what your business outcomes should be, right? That's always what we say. Instead of trying to put this in a bubble or do an experimentation phase, just be very upfront about what your end business goals are. And that will help us frame the application that it should be moving toward and looking at the various technologies that make sense. There's a lot of hesitancy, especially with people who have legacy software, and that we are not foreign to that. We have done a lot of modernization over the course of our journey with our clients, and there's nothing to shy away from embracing digital transformation or modernization because you're afraid that it's too monolithic or it's too hard to do. There's a way to break it down. There's a way to do it, and so. It's an exciting time. I think clients that leverage this new technology have found it to be really an accelerant and very much power on their side.
All right. So all we have is to fear is fear itself. Johnny, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Back to you guys in the studio.
Good stuff from Mike Vizard. Well, guys, that's going to wrap our show for today, Monday, September 28th. We will be back tomorrow with all new fresh content, and we'll speak to you then. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel. Be safe, be strong, TechStrong.